Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Rowan Ford. Rowan Ford was born on April 11, 1998, in San Diego, California. When she was young, her parents divorced, and her mother, Colleen, moved with her to a small town called Stella, Missouri. Colleen later met a man named David, and they married. Colleen already had several children from a previous marriage, and soon after their marriage, she and David had a daughter together. Rowan has two older sisters and two older brothers, and they are very close. She enjoys spending time outdoors, biking around town, swimming, and pursuing her passion for painting. She also enjoys attending Sunday school at her local church, where she often volunteers to help children who are having trouble with their homework. In November 2007, when Rowan was 9 years old, she was in 4th grade at her local elementary school. Her mother worked the night shift at a store, while her stepfather was often at the farm during the day. As a result, Rowan was often left to fend for herself, which helped her become very independent. On November 2nd, she was home alone, as usual. Colleen went to work, and her stepfather had not yet returned from the farm. The next morning, around 9 o'clock, Colleen returned home from her night shift and checked Rowan's room, but her daughter was not there. She asked her husband if he knew where Rowan was, and he told her that Rowan had asked him if she could stay the night at a friend's house. He agreed without asking the friend's name, since their town was small and he wasn't worried about her safety. Colleen felt worried and decided to ask all of Rowan's friends. Since their town only had a few streets, this didn't take long. However, none of Rowan's friends had seen her, and she had not spent the night at any of their homes. This made her mother even more anxious. Colleen searched all over town but could not find her daughter. She finally returned home and told her husband that Rowan was missing. She asked him to contact the police to report the incident, but he assured her that everything was fine and that Rowan would be home soon. After waiting for a few more hours without seeing Rowan, Colleen decided to call 911 and take matters into her own hands. The local sheriff immediately organized a search operation. He went to Colleen's house to interview David, the last person to see Rowan before she disappeared. David said that he had been working on the farm with his co-worker Christopher that evening when Nathan, a mutual friend of theirs, came to visit. They decided to go to David's house to drink and play pool. They stopped by the store to buy some alcohol before heading to David's house, where they stayed for a few hours. That night, Christopher asked Nathan to drive him to a nearby town to pick up car. They convinced David to join them to continue their party. Before leaving the house, Christopher checked to see if Rowan was asleep in her room and found her already asleep. After David left with his friends, they stopped at a store to buy more alcohol and then went to Christopher's trailer, where they continued drinking for about an hour. David then decided to go home and asked Nathan for a ride. Nathan agreed but chose to take a detour rather than the highway, as he was quite drunk and did not want to get in trouble with the police. Nathan dropped David off and drove home, while David went straight to bed. Shortly after, Rowan woke him up and asked if she could stay the night at a friend's house. Without thinking much of it, he agreed and fell asleep. The police approached the case with suspicion. What puzzled them most was that a 9-year-old girl would decide to go to a friend's house in the middle of the night, especially since her stepfather had not asked about the friend she was visiting. The police chief suspected that David might be hiding something or had something to do with Rowan's disappearance, but there was no evidence to support this suspicion. The police searched the town and the surrounding area until late at night. Locals quickly joined the search because they knew the Rowan family and wanted to help. Stella had a population of only about 150, so news of Rowan's disappearance spread rapidly throughout the area. Locals usually felt safe letting their children play outside, as there was not much going on in such a peaceful place. However, When Rowan disappeared without a trace and the police could not find her throughout the day, the people of Stella became extremely panicked. On the first day of the search, nothing was found. Then, on November 4th, the police went to the neighboring town and spoke to Christopher, who confirmed David's story. However, Christopher added that his friend had not contacted him since that evening, and he had only learned of Rowan's disappearance that same day. The police expanded the search and brought in more volunteers, but they still could not find Rowan or any clues regarding her whereabouts. The next morning, the FBI joined the investigation while local police continued to search for Rowan in the area around town. Detectives focused on the possibility of kidnapping. They strongly doubted the David story, as it seemed very suspicious. The police also checked with all of Rowan's friends and confirmed that she had not visited any of them that night. Investigators interviewed David several times, and his testimony varied in detail, further raising suspicions about his involvement. For example, he provided different times for being away that night and even stated that Rowan may not have asked him before going to visit a friend. FBI agents further discovered that on the night of her missing, David had asked his mother to lend him her car, although he had not initially disclosed this to the police. As a result, the police seized both cars for testing, but experts found no evidence. Detectives continued discussions with Christopher and Nathan, as both were with David that night. Christopher was invited to the police station and told the same story as the day before. He also agreed to take a polygraph test, which showed no signs of deception. A few hours after Christopher left the station and returned to work, he saw Chief Clark's car. Christopher signaled for Chief Clark to stop. Sheriff Clark is the police chief in the town of Witten and has known Christopher for 17 years, since Christopher was a child. Clark was a friend of Christopher's adoptive parents, and Christopher had always respected him. He often turned to him for advice or help in times of trouble. Sheriff Clark contacted Christopher, and they discussed Rowan's disappearance. Clark was aware of the case but was not directly involved, as the search was being handled by the Stella Police Department. During their conversation, Clark suspected that Christopher was withholding information, as Rowan's life was in danger and her fate was still uncertain. Therefore, Clark decided to share these suspicions with the FBI, contacting agents to explain his concerns. Investigators suspect that Christopher may be withholding important information about Rowan's disappearance, which could implicate her stepfather. It is possible that he asked Christopher to lie and alter some details in his account of the events of that night. Christopher now fears that he will be considered an accomplice if he tells the truth. Sheriff Clark informed the FBI agents that he had a good and trusting relationship with Christopher, so he wanted to help convince him to share information. That same day, Christopher went to Colleen's home to ask her about the progress of the search. Simultaneously, the FBI agents also visited Rowan's mother again. When they met with Christopher, they continued to ask him a few questions, and he once again confirmed that the events of that night happened exactly as he had described them. However, this time he also mentioned that he did not rule out the possibility that David was involved in Rowan's disappearance and expressed his desire to help them find the truth, no matter how frightening it might be. He suggested wearing a wiretap and approaching David to try to get him to confess. However, the detectives decided not to use such tactics. Instead, they asked Christopher if he could think of any locations where his friend might have hidden Rowan's body, and he suggested several places. The next day, the police began investigating these locations while continuing to search the area around Stella's house. FBI agents once again brought David in for questioning, but he repeatedly denied any involvement. Detectives also searched David's house in the hope of finding clues, but nothing was discovered. On November 7th, the police asked Christopher to return to the station to obtain his consent to search the safe in David's home. Christopher had been living with David for several months due to not having his own place, and some of his belongings were still there. Christopher gave the police permission to search the safe, his trailer, and his car. He also voluntarily provided a DNA sample and agreed to answer additional questions from the detectives. They began questioning him that evening and again asked him to confirm David's story. This time, however, Christopher suddenly admitted that his friend's story was not entirely true. The investigators began to pressure him to tell them what really happened. This pressure caused Christopher to become agitated. He said that if the police were going to treat him like a criminal and try to implicate him in Rowan's disappearance, he would not continue the conversation. The detectives then had to end the interview, and Christopher left the station. That night, he went to see Chief Clark and told him the whole story. He complained that the detectives were treating him as a suspect and said that he might need to hire a lawyer. The chief replied that it was his right, but asked him to understand that the police were only doing what they could to find Rowan. In response, Christopher stated that he would not speak to them anymore and that if he wanted to share any more information, he would only speak to Sheriff Clark. He continued to persuade Christopher to share what he knew. After a while, Christopher began to cry and said that he had always loved Rowan and would never hurt her. During his time living in David's house, Christopher developed a close relationship with Rowan and the other children. They began to consider him a member of the family and even called him Uncle Christopher. Sheriff Clark realized that Christopher was about to reveal everything he knew. However, just as Christopher was about to share, someone came to the police station, causing Sheriff Clark to temporarily lose focus. Christopher then left the office without revealing what he was about to say. Sheriff Clark eventually contacted the FBI and informed them about the conversation. He explained that Christopher was willing to share most of what he knew but warned that if he was pressed too hard, Christopher might refuse to talk and seek legal counsel. Clark offered to give Christopher time to think it over, and the detectives agreed. The search for Rowan continued the next day without success. However, the situation changed on November 9th, a week after Rowan went missing. Search parties found Rowan's body in a remote area near a town called Powell, about 10 miles from where Stella lived. The body was covered in leaves and debris, with only a sock remaining. Medical examiners determined that Rowan had been strangled and sexually assaulted. Shortly after the body was discovered, FBI agents contacted Chief Clark and asked him to speak with Christopher again, hoping he would reveal more information. The chief learned that Christopher had come to the police station earlier that morning when Chief Clark was not there and had informed other officers that he urgently needed to see him. The chief searched everywhere for Christopher but could not find him. Christopher then contacted Chief Clark himself. He expressed obvious distress and concern that he was being followed. He explained that after hearing about the discovery of Rowan's body, he had driven around town to calm down and had noticed a gray car following him. Chief Clark claimed to be unaware of any surveillance activity and asked to meet Christopher directly. When Christopher met with the investigators, he expressed concern for his safety. He feared that after the discovery of Rowan's body, he might be charged with murder and that someone would take revenge on him. Clark took him to the police station and explained that now that the case had been ruled a murder, it was time for him to reveal everything he knew. Christopher began to cry. The sheriff asked him to tell him what David had done to Rowan. Christopher said that there were too many people at the police station and that he did not want to discuss it there. He suggested going to a quieter place and mentioned a small bridge a few miles from their town. The sheriff agreed, and they drove there together. As they got out of the car, Christopher suddenly raised his hands and asked the police to handcuff him. The sheriff was surprised and said that it was unnecessary, but Christopher insisted that after what he had said, the police had to do so. Christopher then began to recount the story he had told the police many times. He went to his trailer with Nathan and David, where they continued drinking. After a while, his friends decided to go home, and David asked Nathan to drive them. They said they would take a detour to avoid the police. However, Christopher then suddenly announced that he wanted to sexually assault Rowan and that he planned to do so. Knowing that it would take his friends a long time to take a detour through the fields, he drove straight to David's house on the main highway. He then barged into Rowan's room, picked her up, and carried her to his car, intending not to wake her. Christopher then took Rowan to his trailer, where he assaulted her. According to Christopher, Rowan had just woken up and tried to resist but was unable to escape. Christopher did not turn on the lights or talk to Rowan because he did not want her to recognize him. After committing this act, Christopher intended to take Rowan home and leave. But the plan did not go as intended. When Christopher carried Rowan out of the trailer, the moon was shining brightly, and Rowan saw Christopher's face clearly. Panicking, Christopher grabbed a rope and strangled her. When she died, he loaded her body into the car and began to think about what to do next. Initially, he wanted to throw her off the bridge, the same bridge where he stood with Sheriff Clark, but he realized her body would be found too quickly. So, he got into the driver's seat and started driving around the county, considering other options. Soon, he remembered a large pit near a neighboring town and headed there. He threw the victim's body into the pit and tried to cover it with branches, but the pit was too large to cover completely. When he returned to the car, he noticed traces of Rowan's blood on his clothes and the mattress. Christopher realized he needed to get rid of the pants, underwear, and rope used to kill the victim. He gathered all of these items and planned to put them in a large barrel to burn. However, Christopher quickly realized that such a fire would certainly attract attention, so he dragged the barrel into the shed, closed the door, and set it on fire. Sheriff Clark was surprised by this story. He had previously believed that David had committed the crime and that Christopher was just hiding some information. It was hard to believe that a man he had known for nearly 20 years could be so brutal. Christopher had 3 young children, and although he had not lived with them since his divorce, he had always seemed like a nice man. But the truth was much colder. After Christopher finished telling his story, he voluntarily went to the police station. The sheriff did not handcuff him. It was only after they arrived and the man repeated his confession to the FBI agents that he was arrested for murder. Christopher also signed a voluntary consent form to allow his trailer and car to be searched. He eventually said that he regretted his actions and cried like a baby all the next day. Investigators went to inform David that Christopher had confessed to the murder. Based on David's behavior and inconsistent statements, they suspected that he might have been protecting his friend. However, they discovered something even more shocking. When brought in for questioning, David changed his testimony of events. According to David's testimony, when he came home and found Rowan not in her room, he suspected that Christopher might have kidnapped her. So he took his mother's car and drove to Christopher's trailer. When David entered the trailer, he found her lying on the bed with Christopher. Instead of saving Rowan, David decided to join in and bully her as well. David then helped his friend dispose of the body. He stated that throughout the incident, he was shocked and could not remember anything that happened. The detectives, who were initially surprised by this incident, contacted Christopher again to confirm David's statement. However, Christopher insisted that his friend was not involved and that everything happened exactly as he had previously said. This further confused the detectives, but Christopher's statement was consistent with the facts. A medical expert confirmed that Rowan had been strangled with a thin wire, a detail that only the killer would know. During the search of the trailer, the police found a container of ashes. In addition, they found a hair in the trailer that matched Rowan's. Although investigators were unable to determine who was telling the truth, both men made accusations against one another. As a result, David was also arrested, and both cases went to trial. During the trial, Christopher requested that all of his statements be removed from the record, arguing that he did not know they could be used against him and that the police had violated his rights. However, the judge rejected this request because all of his conversations with investigators had been completely voluntary. Christopher also tried to explain the difficult circumstances of his childhood. He had experienced many family changes since he was young, which had a significant impact on his development. Christopher also saw a specialist who confirmed that he exhibited signs of developmental problems but could not help him avoid punishment. In 2012, 5 years after the murder, he was sentenced to death. He attempted to appeal the conviction but was unsuccessful. For David, the situation was much more complicated. He admitted to attacking and killing Rowan, but his testimony contradicted Christopher's. If the prosecution decided to charge David with murder, Christopher's conviction would likely be overturned, and David could also evade responsibility because there was no solid evidence against him, such as DNA. The prosecution could not afford to make such a risky claim. In fact, they were still uncertain about David's involvement in the case. They did not rule out the possibility that David had committed the crime alongside Christopher, but there was no evidence to support this theory. In the end, a difficult decision was made. To avoid the risk of overturning Christopher's conviction, they reduced David's charges to significantly lesser ones. David pleaded guilty to 2 counts, child endangerment and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison, with a minimum of 5 years to serve.
Agostina Jalabert was born on March 23, 1991, in Carmen de Patagones, Buenos Aires, Argentina. She belonged to a well-known family and was the eldest of 3 daughters of Colina and Edgardo Jalabert, who served as the Secretary of Health in their city. Her uncle, German Jalabert, a former provincial minister of tourism, and was a pre-candidate for deputy in the Rio Negro region. Consequently, the Jalabert family was widely recognized in their province and other regions of Argentina. Those who knew Agostina since her childhood consistently praised her outstanding qualities. She was described as a sensitive, sincere, and loving child who had a passion for dogs. She excelled in design, crafts, and decoration. She had a keen sense of taste and excelled in many things. Agostina also had a strong interest in fashion. She even designed the graduation sweaters for her high school class. She loved dressing up, and during her teenage years, her friends often gathered in the garage of her house for pre-dance parties. She would try to introduce her different groups of friends to each other, always striving to connect people. Those close to her described her as sociable and an excellent hostess. Agostina enjoyed baking and cooking, and she was skilled at it. With a curious nature, when something piqued her interest, she pursued it. After completing her secondary education, she initially enrolled in architecture but later abandoned it. During that time, she focused her energy on fashion design and studied it for a while, but she ultimately changed her direction. Nevertheless, she was a successful young woman who used her knowledge to chase her dreams. She even started her own clothing brand, worked as a model, and was building her career. At some point in her adult life, Agostina's path crossed with Juan Reverter, with whom she began a relationship that seemed to be going well. Little is known about Juan's life, and even the names of his parents have not been disclosed. The only accessible information about Juan is his LinkedIn profile, which promotes him as a software engineer and a graduate of the National Technological University in Argentina. Interestingly, a search at the university did not reveal him as a graduate. Instead, a resolution from the university's Superior Council in 2017 stated that he had not passed 2 subjects during the periods of 2008 and 2009, which led to him losing his status as a regular student in the field of information systems engineering. Agostina and Juan's relationship began during the global issue and was characterized by ups and downs. According to some of her family members, he exhibited psychological violence towards her and was controlling. However, the situation escalated in the summer of 2021, marked by more serious conflicts and violence perpetrated by Juan against Agostina. Her father shared that she was deeply affected by the relationship, but with the support of her family, She was able to rebuild her life and had no contact with him for a whole year. In September 2022, Agostina made the decision to move to Mexico, specifically to the beautiful beach town of Playa del Carmen in the Riviera Maya, to advance her modeling career. She rented an apartment and left her comfort zone in Argentina, creating some distance from Juan. In Mexico, Agostina worked as a hostess and engaged in modeling opportunities. Her dream was to travel the world while pursuing her modeling aspirations. She loved Playa del Carmen and felt genuinely happy there, quickly finding work and thriving. She built many friendships and had the support of a childhood friend who lived nearby, so she didn't feel alone. Additionally, she brought her dog, Bruna, along for emotional support. Agostina loved traveling, which was clear from her social media posts. She had visited amazing places like Brazil, New Zealand, China, and several European capitals such as Madrid, Paris, London, and Brussels, sharing her experiences with her 16,000 Instagram followers. She planned to move to Europe in the future. Meanwhile, her 21-year-old sister Candela came to spend the summer in Playa del Carmen to enjoy the beautiful beaches and be near Agostina. They chose to share Agostina's two-bedroom apartment to stay comfortable. At the end of December, Agostina's ex-boyfriend Juan returned to her life for the holidays. They reconciled, and he began living with both Agostina and her sister, Candela. Candela was never comfortable with the idea of sharing their home with her sister's boyfriend, but things moved quickly, and soon he was staying in Agostina's room. In recent talks with her family, Agostina revealed that they had decided to get back together and that they planned to move to Spain. However, their relationship never seemed to maintain peace for long. On Thursday, February 16th, a serious argument broke out after Agostina discovered that her partner had been unfaithful. The tension in the apartment was high. The following day, February 17th, 2023, Candela left her sister alone with Juan. When Candela returned the next morning at 7 a.m., she found the door to her sister's apartment locked. She asked the building's doorman if there was a way to get inside. They informed her that they had heard screams and a fight coming from the apartment during the night, prompting the police to be called twice due to complaints from neighbors. Candela returned to the apartment and tried to enter using the access code, but it didn't work. The door was locked from the inside, so she knocked. After several attempts, Juan Reverter eventually answered the door and claimed that Agostina was sleeping. While Agostina and Candela were arguing, Agostina's small dog started barking. The dog, Bruna, led her to the bathroom, and there they found Agostina hanging from the towel rack, sitting or half-sitting, 3 feet off the floor with many bruises. They quickly untied her and brought her to the living room to administer CPR, but it was too late. Agostina was already dead. Candela then called the police. Forensic experts arrived to investigate the scene and took the body to the morgue, where an autopsy was conducted. The case was originally ruled to end one's own life and marked as closed. However, the Jalabert family believed that Agostina's death was actually a murder by her boyfriend, and they had valid reasons for this suspicion. In late February, Edgardo sent a letter to the Foreign Ministry. This letter, which reached the Minister of Foreign Affairs, urged Mexican authorities to take action and highlighted the family's feelings of helplessness regarding their daughter's death. Edgardo pointed out that the investigation was poorly conducted. Basic protocols were not followed. The boyfriend was not arrested. His phone was not seized. Toxicology tests were not performed, and no injuries were examined. Additionally, the family struggled to access the case details, despite the Argentine consulate's attempts to obtain records of the proceedings. These efforts were unsuccessful. Edgardo noted that the Foreign Ministry is required to investigate and address violence against women and to ensure the family receives clarity about Agostina's death. In this case, the ministry's involvement is crucial because, under the current investigation conditions in Mexico, Juan is free to act. Since Juan's legal status is not at risk, he is viewed as a person of interest rather than a fugitive. It's important to remember that both Agostina and Juan are Argentine citizens, and the Foreign Ministry must safeguard the rights of both. Even if it turns out that Juan committed the crime alleged by Agostina's family. Colina, Agostina's mother, launched a media campaign to seek justice and pressure Mexican authorities. She spoke out about the abusive relationship between her daughter and her partner. In a televised interview, Colina claimed that Agostina was killed by her boyfriend and detailed how her daughter had been tortured, abused, and beaten, including receiving blows to the head before her death. Colina believed that he had faked the incident, making it look like Agostina hanged herself with a towel rack. She noted that Agostina had been dressed and ready to go out when Candela found her. According to Colina, no one who is considering end one's own life would take the time to get dressed. Colina recalled that Juan had a violent past. During a press conference shared on social media, she disclosed that Juan and Agostina had been facing ongoing issues that they had kept hidden. She expressed that she never trusted him and mentioned that 2 years earlier they had to rescue Agostina from the apartment she shared with Juan after he physically assaulted her. Colina emphasized that if they hadn't intervened that day, her daughter might have lost her life. Following that incident, Agostina decided not to report it, and her parents chose to respect her choice, even though they felt it was important to report such events to the authorities. The impact of not taking action at that time was felt 2 years later in Mexico. On Friday, February 17, at 2:30 p.m., Agostina sent a message to her mother expressing feelings of low self-worth and saying she didn't deserve to be with someone who would hurt her. Colina offered her support from a distance and encouraged Agostina to leave the apartment. Colina believed Agostina made a risky decision by going back to the violent man, which ultimately led to a bad outcome. Sadly, Juan Manuel's parents had reached out to the family and promised to help, but communication ceased when Juan failed to attend a scheduled Zoom meeting to explain his side of the story. Colina stated that Juan had been evading contact, but suspected he was still monitoring the situation to stay updated. She thought he would have shared his perspective if he had nothing to hide. Angry and frustrated, she claimed that Juan's parents were responsible for hiding what she saw as a monstrous act. On March 8th, International Women's Day, marches took place in Mexico and Argentina, demanding justice for Agostina. This intensified pressure on the Mexican prosecutor's office, which then announced an investigation into the death of the Argentine model as a potential femicide. The decision was influenced by the autopsy report, which revealed signs of head and facial injuries, multiple cuts on the body, and bruises indicating possible abuse. A forensic expert hired by the Jalabert family reviewed the official report and pointed out various signs of violence, including punch marks on the mouth and a significant head injury. The expert also noted cuts on several parts of the body, internal and external bruises, suggesting recent non-consensual abuse activity. Unfortunately, the only evidence available is this forensic report, because the Mexican authorities cremated Agostina's body shortly after classifying the case as an end one's own life. After the protests on International Women's Day, the Mexican justice system announced that it has reclassified the case. The family's lawyer confirmed that the case has been transferred to a specialized unit that deals with such matters. She accused the main suspect, Juan Reverter, of trying to stage a end one's own life case and pointed out signs of violence at the crime scene. The apartment was locked from the inside, and both the victim and her partner had visible injuries. A leg from a table was found out of place on the floor, and 2 calls were made to the police the night before. The lawyer criticized the judicial investigation, stating that the crime scene was not properly secured, which goes against established protocol. It is crucial that both the scene and the victim's body be preserved until the investigation is complete. She also noted that due to various mistakes, information that could have been accessed from the devices was lost, as the suspect took the cell phones and all related data with him. The investigation into Agostina's death in Mexico is proving to be difficult for her family, who are monitoring the situation from Argentina, over 7,000 kilometers away, facing different legal and cultural challenges. On March 13th, 2023, the prosecutor from Quintana Roo stated during a press conference that Agostina, an Argentine model and influencer, had died by end her own life. He mentioned a history of violence in her relationship with her partner, raising the possibility that Juan may have played a role in her decision to take her life, which could now be part of the investigation. When asked by reporters about the cigarette burns found on Agostina's body, the prosecutor claimed those injuries were inflicted before her death. He indicated that there had been a violent incident between her and her partner the night prior, and there is substantial evidence to support this. The prosecutor mentioned that Juan had been questioned by the investigative police, but there was not enough evidence at that time for an arrest or any legal action against him. Nevertheless, this did not rule out the possibility of him being pursued later if connections to Agostina's death were uncovered. Edgardo, Agostina's father, argued for a change in how the case was classified, stating that their lawyer had found several pieces of evidence that warranted classifying it as femicide. German, the victim's uncle, noted that the Attorney General was pushing the end her own life theory because recognizing the evidence suggesting femicide would mean admitting to their shortcomings. He felt that the prosecution had acted carelessly and too quickly in the investigation's early phases, resulting in important evidence being lost. A journalist mentioned that the prosecutor's office would need to interview the boyfriend as part of the investigation, especially if the case leads to an end her own life. This means he will be required to provide statements to help clarify the situation. Additionally, the journalist noted that the crime was discovered over the weekend, a time when interns and junior investigators usually manage the inquiries in Mexico. This may have contributed to the mishandling of the case. He believes that their errors were not intentional but stemmed from inexperience, which impacted the way the investigation was conducted. A few days, news emerged in Argentina about a call received by Agostina's father, Edgardo. A prosecutor from Quintana Roo reached out to him at the request of the state prosecutor's office. They wanted to discuss the situation with the family. The caller expressed that the system wished to apologize for what had occurred. They assured that if Agostina's boyfriend was found responsible, they would pursue legal action, emphasizing that there was no intention to conceal anything by the prosecutor's office. They also stated that if any public official from the prosecutor's office was found accountable, appropriate actions would be taken. Additionally, the caller mentioned that they would arrange a meeting with the general prosecutor and a team of experts to show Edgardo the evidence they had. They clarified that the general prosecutor had directed other state agencies in Mexico to re-evaluate the autopsy as well. The latest update was provided at the end of March, just a few days before the one-month anniversary of Agostina's death. The case has been moved to the Women's Crimes Division, which means Agostina's case is now being treated as one involving femicide and gender violence. The lawyer is collaborating with the prosecutor assigned to the case and is focusing on gathering evidence to support the femicide angle, as well as examining Juan's potential involvement. She expressed regret for not being able to share more information, but indicated that all evidence related to the murder is currently sealed. The lawyer explained that Juan's arrest timeline will depend on the investigation's findings. It is the prosecutor's responsibility to decide whether there is enough evidence or if additional evidence is required. Despite this, the lawyer expressed confidence in her ability to prove their case. The Mexican justice system has not issued an arrest warrant for him, and no legal actions have been initiated in Argentina since the alleged crime took place in another country. While he is not in custody, he has kept a low profile and has not confronted the family of the girlfriend he reportedly loved and lived with until her death. This case is still being developed, and since it is at an early stage, many processes are being carried out privately and out of the public eye. The prosecutor's office, which is investigating the suspected femicide, has issued a document to find Juan Reverter. This order, issued on June 7, 2023, by the Specialized Prosecutor's Office, focused on femicide cases, aims to search for and locate Juan and ask him to come in for questioning without taking away his freedom. The goal is to conduct a more thorough interview to gather additional information and meet the requirements set by the authorities. It was just after 4:30 in the morning when the tracking app on Sade Robinson's phone suddenly went dark. Earlier that night, she had left work, excited about her first date with a man she'd recently met. By sunrise, her car was in flames, and along the shores of Lake Michigan, something unimaginable was waiting to be discovered. Sade Robinson was born in 2004 in Vicksburg, Mississippi. She is the daughter of Sheena Scarborough and Carlos Robinson. Her life changed early on. When she was just a year old, her parents separated. Sade then moved with her mother to Milwaukee, settling into her grandparents' home. This city would become the backdrop of her formative years and the place where her vibrant personality began to bloom. From the start, Sade stood out. She was curious, energetic, and always eager to learn about the world around her. She approached every activity, from soccer to Girl Scouts, with great enthusiasm. These early experiences not only allowed her to shine, but also helped shape her natural skills in leadership, teamwork, and discipline. Though Sade's father lived in Florida, she maintained a close bond with him. Frequent visits between states became a routine part of her life, and through them, she developed a rare sense of independence and responsibility at a young age. As she grew older, Sade's passions began to take clearer form. She was drawn to the arts, especially rap music and dance, where she could express herself freely. But her dreams weren't limited to the creative world. She also felt a deep desire to serve her country and envisioned herself someday joining the armed forces. Her academic record was equally impressive. Sade was known as a standout student, always focused and determined. Yet, even with her achievements, she wasn't immune to challenges. During 7th grade, she encountered difficulties at school. As a result, she made the brave decision to relocate to Florida and live with her father, seeking a fresh start. Once again, Sade showed resilience in her new environment. She continued to excel, both socially and academically. Teachers and peers alike admired her focus, her ambition, and her quiet confidence, one that was rooted in strength rather than pride. In 2019, after spending several years in Florida, she returned to Milwaukee to live with her mother. When her final year of high school arrived in 2021, Sade poured herself into her studies, managing to graduate an entire semester early, yet another example of her unwavering determination. By 2024, at just 19 years old, Sade Robinson embodied a rare blend of discipline, ambition, and independence. She was pursuing a degree in art at Milwaukee Area Technical College, balancing her education with 2 full-time jobs. But her ambitions didn't stop there. She had already set her sights on a future in criminal law. Through sheer effort and careful, Sade was able to accomplish a major milestone. She bought her own car. It was more than just a vehicle. It represented her growing independence. Not long after, she moved out of her mother's home and rented her very own apartment. She balanced 2 demanding jobs to support herself. One of them was at Pizza Shuttle, where her work ethic, discipline, and initiative didn't go unnoticed. She quickly rose through the ranks and was promoted to manager. Her second job was at the prestigious Wisconsin Country Club, where she also helped her younger sister secure a position, making sure her sibling had access to the same opportunities that had shaped her own path. At that moment, her future looked incredibly bright. She had clear goals, the discipline to chase them, and the kind of maturity most people twice her age hadn't yet reached. Yet, behind all of that strength and focus, Sade still carried the hopes of any young woman her age. She dreamed of love, companionship, and a meaningful connection. What she never expected was that this search would lead her into the most dangerous moment of her life. April 1st, 2024 began like any other day for Sade. She started her morning shift at Pizza Shuttle, as she often did, took a few moments before work to catch up with her mother over FaceTime. Everything about the day seemed routine until the end of her shift. Sade was excited, because she had a date planned that evening with a man she had recently met through a dating app. She left work to meet him. That would be the last time anyone in her group would see or hear from her. The following day, April 2nd, Said didn't show up for her shift. She hadn't called in sick or left a message, which was completely out of character. Concern quickly spread among her co-workers. They began texting and calling her, hoping for an explanation, but there was no reply. Her family and close friends also began to worry. None of them had heard from her since the day before. As hours passed without a word, worry turned into panic. Those closest to her knew something was wrong. This was a chilling and inexplicable silence. As night fell and still no answers emerged, one of Said's friends made the police and report her missing. Before doing so, she checked Said's most recent social media activity and found something crucial: a Snapchat post of Saad. The timestamp was around 9 p.m. on the night of April 1st. That would be the final digital trace Saad left behind. On April 3rd, with no updates and mounting concern, police officers went to Saad's apartment. They knocked on the door, but there was no answer and no sounds from within. Unbeknownst to them, authorities elsewhere in the city had already made a horrifying discovery. At around 7:30 a.m. on April 2nd, 2024, the Milwaukee Fire Department received a report from local residents about a car on fire. When emergency crews arrived, they found thick smoke and flames engulfing a 2020 Honda Civic. The vehicle had been abandoned and was burning rapidly. Firefighters managed to contain the blaze. No one was inside the car, but the contents of the trunk raised immediate concern. A black coat, a pair of ripped jeans, and other women's clothing, charred but still identifiable. A cell phone, partially damaged by heat, was also recovered. The authorities now had physical evidence, but they still needed to know who the car belonged to. That answer would come soon, and it would change everything. Later that same day, Milwaukee County Sheriff's deputies were called to a different location. A man waiting for a friend had been walking along the edge of a park's beach when he stumbled upon something horrifying: a human leg lying near the shoreline. Forensic teams were called in, and after careful analysis, they determined the leg belonged to an African-American female. The remains were dismembered, but the condition of the limbs suggested the crime had occurred recently. As the investigation into Said's disappearance continued, one of the officers who had earlier visited her apartment learned of the discovery of the human remains. The physical description of the remains closely matched the details provided in the missing persons report for Said. Then, a second chilling confirmation arrived. The Honda Civic found burning that morning was registered to Said Robinson. With the pieces beginning to fall into place, detectives returned to her apartment. They spoke with the building's maintenance worker, who revealed that he had seen Said on the morning of April 1st. She seemed excited and said she was looking forward to a date after her shift. Investigators pulled the building's surveillance footage, which showed Said leaving her apartment at 9 p.m. On April 1st, she never returned. That footage, combined with the evidence from the car and the park, created an urgent new direction for the case. Authorities subpoenaed her phone records from her mobile carrier and traced her last text message to a number with a 262 area code. They didn't yet know who the number belonged to, but the content of the exchange made it clear it was the man she had planned to meet that night. Using that lead, police began cross-referencing phone data with surveillance footage. It soon emerged that Said and her date had met at a local venue called the Twisted Fisherman. Footage from the bar and witness statements from staff confirmed their presence there that evening. Another key piece of evidence came from the same friend who had filed the missing persons report. She revealed that she had access to Said's location through an app called Life 360, commonly used to track friends and family in real time. According to the app's log, the last known location for Said Robinson was Warnemont Park at 4:30 a.m. on April 2nd. A clearer timeline began to take shape. Investigators learned that she was originally scheduled to meet her date at 5 p.m. on April 1st at a place called Brad House. However, at the last minute, the man changed the location to a different venue, Twisted Fisherman, a bar where he had previously worked. He claimed he needed to stop by to pick up some paperwork. Said had no objection. At 5:20 p.m., she arrived at Twisted Fisherman. He was already there, waiting at the bar. The two sat side by side, ordered drinks and food, and chatted casually as the evening unfolded. Just over an hour later, they left the bar together, got into Said's car, and drove to a second location, Duke's, another bar. They spent roughly 3 hours at Duke's before heading to a residential neighborhood in southwestern Milwaukee, where they remained for several more hours. At some point in the early morning hours of April 2nd, Said's phone showed movement again, this time heading toward Warnemont Park. At 4:35, her Life 360 tracking app went silent. The battery had died. That was the last signal the phone would ever send. All signs pointed to one horrifying conclusion. Said Robinson had been murdered, and the person she had trusted enough to meet that night was now the prime suspect. Thanks to swift and coordinated work by law enforcement, the investigation progressed rapidly. Authorities had already zeroed in on one individual. Though his name was still unknown to the public, police knew he was the last person to see Said alive. The evidence they had gathered was enough to obtain both an arrest warrant and a search warrant for the residence traced from Said's phone activity. On April 4th at 1 p.m., officers moved in. They arrived at the suspect's home and took him into custody. His identity was finally confirmed. Maxwell Anderson, a 33-year-old man and the son of a well-known businessman in the region. Following his arrest, disturbing details about his background began to emerge. Throughout his life, Anderson had exhibited a pattern of problematic behavior. His own father had once tried to help him by giving him a position in the family business, but eventually fired him, stating that he was unfit for the job. Anderson was also a U.S. Navy veteran, but in recent years he had drifted from one job to the next, working primarily as a bartender in various establishments across Milwaukee. None of the positions lasted long. Between 2014 and 2019, he had multiple arrests on record, mostly for minor offenses such as public disorder and disturbances. Investigators worked to determine exactly how Said and Anderson first met. The initial assumption was that they had connected through a dating app, but another theory surfaced. They may have crossed paths in person at one of the bars where Anderson had worked, locations that Said and her friends were known to frequent. Following the arrest of Maxwell Anderson, detectives launched an extensive search of his residence. What they found inside confirmed their worst fears. In one of the bedrooms, investigators discovered bloodstains on the bedding and on a wall leading down to the basement. That area, they soon realized, held even more disturbing clues. Inside the basement, they located multiple gas canisters and electric saws, items that raised immediate suspicion. The basement wasn't just a storage area, it appeared to have been prepared for something dark, something planned. The space, now a central point in the investigation, suggested that the crime against Said had been both premeditated and executed with chilling precision. The search for evidence did not stop there. On April 6th, just days after the house search, investigators returned to the area where Said's burned car had been discovered. Just 1 block away, they made another gruesome find: a human foot. The skin tone, size, and pink nail polish matched the severed leg recovered earlier. It belonged to Said. Meanwhile, detectives continued to comb through surveillance footage near the scene of the car fire. It was here they uncovered a critical piece of evidence. Security cameras captured Maxwell Anderson stepping out of Said's Honda Civic moments before setting it ablaze. Several bystanders in the area at the time later identified him as the man responsible. After starting the fire, Anderson was seen calmly walking away and boarding a nearby bus. But perhaps the most chilling revelation came from a key witness who knew Anderson personally. Alarmed by the news of Said's disappearance, this individual immediately went to the police. What they shared would reshape the entire investigation. A month before the crime, On March 5th, Anderson had allegedly described a plan to lure a woman to his basement, shoot her, dismember her body, and scatter the remains across the city. At the time, it seemed like a disturbing joke. In retrospect, it was a blueprint. The witness went on to describe a visit to Anderson's house just days before the murder. The basement, they said, was covered in plastic sheeting. There were 3 saws in plain view, a large tarp, and an area staged with intimate objects, further suggesting the calculated nature of the crime. Authorities feared there could be additional victims and began re-examining other reports linked to Anderson. In February 2024, a woman came forward claiming that after meeting Anderson at a bar, he invited her to his home. Once there, she began to feel unwell, leading her to suspect he had drugged her drink. She escaped before anything could happen. That escape may have saved her life. With mounting evidence, physical, digital, and testimonial, the prosecution built a powerful case. On April 12th, just 10 days after Sade Robinson vanished, Maxwell Anderson was formally charged with first-degree intentional homicide, mutilation of a corpse, and arson to conceal a crime. Though Anderson continued to claim innocence, the case against him was overwhelming. On the morning of June 6, 2025, the courtroom in Milwaukee was silent and tense. Families, reporters, and community members filled every seat. After months of grief, outrage, and unanswered questions, the moment had finally arrived. The jury had reached its decision. It took less than a day of deliberation. By 9:00 a.m. the next morning, their verdict was ready. Maxwell Anderson found guilty on all counts. First-degree intentional homicide, mutilation of a corpse, hiding a corpse, arson. It was official. The man who had lured 19-year-old Sade Robinson on a first date only to brutally kill and dismember her was now legally responsible for one of the most horrifying crimes Milwaukee had ever seen. The trial had laid bare every excruciating detail. Jurors were shown hundreds of surveillance images and forensic photographs. They listened to the testimony of dozens of witnesses. They saw snapshots of Sade in her final hours, alive, vulnerable, and unaware of the fate awaiting her. The prosecutor made the case clear. Sade was killed inside Anderson's home. He later dismembered her body, her remains, legs, arms, torso, even her right breast were scattered across counties. Some were found in the lake, others washed ashore, and in an attempt to erase it all, he set her car ablaze and walked away. Maxwell Anderson did not testify, and his defense team called no witnesses. His lawyer claimed the murder wasn't planned. However, the evidence suggested otherwise, revealing a sequence of events that started like any other night but culminated in horrifying violence. Sade Robinson was ambitious and full of potential. She was a student at Milwaukee Area Technical College, held 2 jobs, and was actively shaping her future. That future was taken from her. Now, justice has been served. Sentencing is scheduled for August 15th, but for her loved ones, the real sentence is something far greater: life without her. Anthony Pignataro was born in 1960 in Buffalo, New York, the youngest of 2 brothers. His father, Ralph Pignataro, was a well-known and highly respected surgeon in the community. After finishing high school, he decided to follow in his father's footsteps and applied to several medical schools in the U.S. However, due to his low grades, he was not admitted to any of them. Eventually, he gained acceptance to a medical school in Puerto Rico, where he began his journey toward becoming a doctor. In 1978, 18 years old, Anthony met 21-year-old Deborah at a club during a visit to his hometown. It was love at first sight. Anthony, tall and charming, swept Deborah off her feet as they danced to Donna Summer's Last Dance. Soon after meeting, they began a relationship. Despite their long-distance relationship, while Anthony studied in Puerto Rico and Deborah worked in New York, their love affair continued. Deborah was born and raised in Williamsville, New York, in a financially struggling family. She worked as a pharmacy assistant. In 1985, after graduating as an ENT doctor from medical school in Puerto Rico, Anthony returned to New York, obtained a medical license, and started working as a surgeon at a local hospital. However, his colleagues criticized his skills, calling him incompetent and predicting an unremarkable career. Despite this, he managed to keep his job. That same year, Anthony and Deborah got married. Early in their marriage, Deborah discovered through a friend that Anthony was having an affair. When she confided in her father, he advised her to forgive Anthony, but only once. Deborah decided to give him another chance. Not long after, they welcomed a son, and a year later, a daughter. They moved into a large home in suburban Buffalo, where Anthony started his own surgical practice. He rented office space in a private clinic and began seeing patients. By 1990, 30 years old, Anthony gained attention for inventing a wig prosthesis that was attached to the scalp using metal pins implanted in the skull. He became his own first client, as he had begun losing his hair at the age of 23. This wig became his patented invention. With prices starting at $3,500, clients could choose from a variety of natural and synthetic hair options. This invention contributed to his local fame. Anthony also performed cosmetic surgeries, such as breast augmentations, facelifts, rhinoplasties, liposuctions, and more. His services were competitively priced, and he often ran promotions to attract clients. Over the next 7 years, Anthony became wealthy and locally renowned, even driving a red Lamborghini. However, his reputation concealed the troubling events that were occurring in his operating room. In 1997, Terry Lamarty, a mother of 4, struggled to lose excess belly fat despite regular exercise. On her 39th birthday, her husband gave her a voucher for a belly liposuction treatment at Anthony's clinic. Excited, she scheduled a consultation with Anthony. During their meeting, she was impressed by his charisma and reassurances, which put her at ease. Anthony assured her that the procedure would go smoothly. Terry began preparing for the operation, undergoing necessary medical tests, consulting specialists, and completing the required paperwork. The surgery was scheduled for June 1997. On the day of her scheduled procedure, at 8:30 a.m., Terry's husband drove her to the clinic. Upon arrival, she went to see Anthony to be examined and given medication to prepare for the surgery. He then wheeled her into the clinic's basement, referred to as the surgical center. To Terry's shock, the room looked nothing like a sterile operating theater. It was just an ordinary basement furnished with a couch, a table, and chairs. She didn't see any proper surgical equipment. Feeling uneasy, she tried to express her desire to cancel the operation, but she was already under the effects of the medication. Her speech slurred, and she lost control of her body. Before passing out, she helplessly screamed. Terry regained consciousness at 5 p.m., fully clothed and sitting on a small sofa in the clinic's first-floor waiting room. Her husband arrived shortly after and took her home. Once home, Terry noticed blood running down her legs. Panicked, she examined herself and found a roughly 10 centimeter long and 2 centimeter deep surgical incision on her stomach, poorly closed with about 20 metal staples. Alarmed, she and her husband immediately called Anthony over the phone. He dismissed their concerns, claiming the blood was excess surgical fluid and telling them not to worry. He assured them the wound was minor and advised Terry to rest and visit him the next morning. That night, Terry's pain became unbearable, worsening by the hour. She also experienced severe nausea and vomiting. By morning, she couldn't endure it anymore and called for an ambulance. At the hospital, doctors discovered that Anthony's stitches were blocking blood flow to her abdomen, causing some tissue to necrotize. On top of that, her intestines had been damaged during the procedure, leading to an infection in the wound. Instead of achieving her desired appearance, Terry was now fighting for her life. Fortunately, she received help in time and survived. A few days later, at 2:30 just while Terry was still recovering in the hospital, she was startled awake by Anthony. He had secretly entered her room and was holding her medical records. He demanded that she immediately pack her belongings and leave the hospital. Terrified, Terry refused and argued with him. Hospital nurses overheard the confrontation and Anthony was forced to leave. After this alarming encounter, Terry remained in the hospital for several more days. Her recovery stretched on for months, and despite doctors reporting the incident to the State Department of Health, Anthony continued practicing medicine. 2 months later, in August 1997, a more tragic event occurred at Anthony's clinic. 26-year-old Sarah Smith, a mother of 2, underwent breast implant surgery, a procedure she had long dreamed of. During the operation, Sarah suffered cardiac arrest. Anthony called an ambulance, but when paramedics arrived, they found him trying to clear Sarah's airway using a wire hanger. The clinic lacked even basic life-saving medical equipment, like a ventilation device. Paramedics resuscitated Sarah on site and transported her to the hospital, but she had already fallen into a coma. After a week in intensive care, Sarah passed away on September 1, 1997. News of Sarah's death quickly spread, sparking a media frenzy. Anthony admitted that Sarah had stopped breathing during the surgery. He said he performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation and injected her with lidocaine, but it was ineffective. Ultimately, he instructed his assistants to call for an ambulance. An investigation by the Herald Police Department revealed that Sarah's death was caused by asphyxia due to severely low oxygen levels, which led to cardiac arrest. A toxicology report further showed that Anthony had administered a dangerously high dose of 2 muscle-relaxing drugs during the procedure, leaving Sarah unable to breathe on her own. After Sarah's death, the New York State Department of Health suspended Anthony Pignataro's medical license. Shortly thereafter, the Erie County District Attorney's Office in New York launched an investigation. Anthony, who had an inflated self-image, had opened his own plastic surgery clinic but failed to hire an anesthesiologist or adequately trained staff. Instead, his wife, Deborah, assisted him despite having only 6 months of medical training. Additionally, a young female medical student interned at the clinic. During Sarah's procedure, both Deborah and the intern reported that Sarah woke up mid-surgery, screaming. In response, Anthony administered additional drugs, causing Sarah to lose consciousness once again. Deborah noticed that Sarah's oxygen levels had dropped to a dangerously low level and alerted Anthony, but he ignored her and continued the operation. Shortly after, Sarah's lips turned blue. She stopped breathing, and her heart eventually stopped. Investigators interviewed Anthony's colleagues and patients, uncovering a reputation for gross incompetence and recklessness. Many of his patients had suffered complications following surgeries. For instance, 78 years old, Sophie Butring underwent a tummy tuck performed by Anthony. She became ill after the procedure, but was hesitant to seek medical attention. Her son eventually convinced her to go to the hospital, which saved her life. She spent 6 weeks in the hospital, recovering from complications caused by the surgery. The New York State Board of Health eventually filed 30 charges of professional misconduct against Anthony. Investigators discovered that he was not licensed to perform plastic surgery and that his basement clinic was grossly unfit for medical procedures. In January 1998, Anthony, then 38 years old, was arrested. By August of that year, his medical license was permanently revoked. Anthony ultimately accepted a plea deal on a negligent homicide charge and was sentenced to 6 months in prison, fined $5,000, and ordered to complete 250 hours of community service. He was also permanently banned from practicing medicine. As the verdict was announced, the judge ordered Anthony to be taken into custody immediately. Deborah, who was visibly upset in the courtroom, was not allowed to say goodbye to her husband. However, if Deborah had known what lay ahead, she likely would not have shed any tears. In December 1998, Anthony was released from jail. He returned home to live with his wife and children, but struggled to find work. During this time, his mother provided financial support. Despite the challenges, he resumed an extramarital affair, which his wife, Deborah, eventually discovered. Furious, she kicked him out of the house. 2 months later, he returned, begging for a second chance, and she reluctantly took him back. By May 1999, Deborah, then 42 years old, suddenly fell gravely ill. She suffered episodes of nausea and body pain, which gradually worsened to include tingling in her arms and legs, difficulty walking, and extended periods confined to bed. Although Deborah sought medical help, doctors were initially unable to determine the cause of her symptoms. Over the following months, her condition continued to deteriorate. By the summer of 1999, she required a wheelchair and began experiencing memory loss. Anthony claimed her symptoms were caused by a diseased gallbladder, which he insisted needed urgent removal. However, Deborah's physician warned that surgery would be too dangerous and could result in her death. Eventually, toxicology tests revealed lethal levels of arsenic in Deborah's blood. A criminal investigation into Deborah's poisoning was launched. Tests conducted on her hair showed that she had been exposed to approximately 30 grams of arsenic in varying doses since May. During questioning, Deborah recalled that her symptoms began after eating soup Anthony had prepared for her. Investigators suspected Anthony had been poisoning her over time. Deborah granted police permission to search their home, where they discovered ant killer containing arsenic. Further evidence revealed that Anthony had purchased the poison using his credit card. He was subsequently brought in for questioning. Anthony admitted to poisoning Deborah, but suggested that the relatives of his deceased patient, Sarah, who passed away after surgery, might have been involved. Due to insufficient evidence, Anthony was released. Deborah was discharged from the hospital, though she remained in a wheelchair and needed ongoing treatment at home. Later, a former cellmate of Anthony's, who had shared a prison cell with him, contacted the police. The cellmate revealed that Anthony had discussed his wife, Deborah's life insurance policy, and his relationship with his mistress. According to the cellmate, Anthony confessed he wanted to start a new life with his mistress and obtain the insurance payout. He had even asked the cellmate for advice on poisoning someone. Recorded phone conversations confirmed that Anthony maintained contact with the cellmate after his release from prison. With this evidence, Anthony was arrested on May 9, 2000 for attempted murder. While he initially denied poisoning Deborah, he eventually pleaded guilty at the end of 2000. Prosecutors proved that Anthony had been adding small doses of poison to Deborah's food and planning to send her for gallbladder surgery, hoping she would die during the procedure. His motive was to prove he wasn't the only doctor to lose a patient on the operating table, reclaim his reputation, and regain financial success. He also sought to justify Sarah's death. Anthony Pignataro was sentenced to 12 years in prison. While incarcerated, he continued to file lawsuits, claiming that Deborah intentionally consumed arsenic to end her life. However, Deborah refuted this in interviews, stating she would never harm herself and even suggested Anthony should experience arsenic poisoning. Following the trial, she divorced Anthony and obtained a protective order prohibiting him from contacting her or their children. Deborah endured a lengthy recovery process after the poisoning. She revealed in interviews that she suffered lasting health issues, including reduced limb mobility and sensitivity, and required outside assistance for daily life. In December 2013, Anthony was released from prison and moved back to New York, where he worked as a grocery delivery man. He legally changed his name to Tony Hote in 2014, explaining that he wanted a fresh start. By 2016, he launched a cosmetic company and falsely portrayed himself as a practicing doctor on the business website. He marketed a product called the Plasma Protocol, claiming it was the first anti-aging skincare treatment derived from a person's DNA plasma. The company operated near his previous plastic surgery clinic. Neighbors began reporting suspicious activities at Anthony's residence, including deliveries of surgical supplies and frequent visits from women in the evenings. These reports prompted police attention, leading Anthony to shut down his business and move to Palm Beach, Florida, where his brother lived. New York police warned law enforcement in Palm Beach about Anthony, describing him as one of the most dangerous people they had ever encountered. By 2019, Anthony was advertising elder care services online and continued to move freely across the country. Florida authorities monitored him, but but there remained concerns about whether he posed a risk to others. As for Deborah, she maintained a private life and struggled with the lasting impact of Anthony's actions, unable to fully recover her health or independence. On a cold December night in 2011, 13-year-old Erica Lynn Parsons vanished without a trace. Her parents claimed she had gone to live with her biological grandmother, but their story raised suspicions. As investigators began to dig deeper, unsettling details emerged: stories of bruises, unexplained absences, and a plastic tote that became impossible to overlook. What truly happened to Erica, and why did it take years for the truth to be revealed? This is a tragic story of a girl who was silenced, but whose story would not remain hidden. Erica Lynn Parsons was born on February 24, 1998, Carolyn Parsons' child. Carolyn separated from her husband, Steve, who was not the biological father, before Erica was born. Despite her small size, Erica was a lively baby. However, just days after her birth, Carolyn had to make a difficult decision due to financial struggles. She chose to put Erica up for adoption to give her daughter a better future. Although Erica's biological father was not in the picture, Carolyn's former brother-in-law and sister-in-law, Sandy and Casey Parsons, chose to adopt Erica. Erica became part of the Parsons family when she joined them at just 4 weeks old. Although the adoption was officially completed in 2000, Sandy later suggested that it actually took place in July instead of March. Casey Parsons happily remembered those early days, saying they had her from the time she was 4 weeks old. By the time the adoption was finalized, she was already calling them Mama and Daddy. They were the only parents she had known. Sandy and Casey had a tumultuous relationship. They got married in the early 1990s and had 3 children. However, their marriage was marred by incidents of domestic violence. Sandy was convicted of assaulting Casey in 1994 and 1997, leading to court-ordered probation and community service. Despite these challenges, they stayed together and welcomed another child, Erica, into their family. Concerns about Erica's safety arose in 2002 when social services started investigating allegations of abuse in the Parsons home, dating back to when Erica was only 2 years old. These allegations raised significant worries about how the family treated their adopted daughter. The Department of Social Services initiated an investigation into claims that Erica had been physically abused. Reports indicated that Casey Parsons often used a belt to discipline Erica, which resulted in visible bruises. Observers noted marks on Erica's buttocks, the back of her legs, and the side of her face. It was also reported that Erica sometimes refused to eat, and that Casey had told her she was not loved. During the interview with the Department of Social Services, Casey denied the claims of abuse. The investigator noticed that Erica seemed comfortable around her parents, sitting on their laps without any signs of fear. However, it was noted that Erica was quite small for her age, weighing only 41 pounds at 4 years old. To ensure Erica's safety, a safety plan was put in place. Casey and Sandy Parsons agreed to use non-physical methods of discipline, including timeouts and grounding, committed to providing a safe and stable home for Erica. On March 1, 2003, Casey went to Mexico for a medical procedure to reverse her tubal ligation. Later that year, in August, Erica started attending Boston Elementary School. The staff remembered her as a shy but kind girl who smiled frequently and had a fondness for stickers. One teacher noted that Erica would push her bangs out of her face when she felt nervous and would shine with pride when she received compliments. In January 2004, Casey announced online that she was pregnant, expecting a child in September. Around this time, the Department of Social Services received a complaint about the Parsons family, which prompted officials to visit their home. The complaint alleged that Erica was weak and that Casey no longer wanted her, asserting that the parents had attempted to give her away. Casey and Sandy denied using physical punishment, stating they raised their voices instead of hitting their children. They also explained that Erica suffered from gastrointestinal issues, causing her to vomit food she didn't like. and denied any threats to withhold food or give her away. When the Department of Social Services interviewed Erica in private, she described discipline as timeouts or loss of privileges and mentioned that she might get spanked for very serious misbehavior, although Erica seemed happy and well-connected with her adoptive parents. Investigators noted her small size and frailty. The Department of Social Services required the Parsons to seek medical care for Erica if her eating issues continued or if her development fell behind. Nonetheless, evidence of neglect was found. As Erica was not receiving necessary medical treatment, she was then placed with her aunt, who noticed that Erica was wearing toddler-sized clothes and was severely underweight. While living with her aunt, Erica began eating regularly, playing, and gaining weight. She also revealed that Casey and Sandy had physically disciplined her. However, the aunt did not pursue legal custody. After 8 months, Casey and Sandy regained custody of Erica. In 2004, Erica moved to a different elementary school. On August 20th of that year, Casey gave birth to a daughter. By 2005, Casey was pregnant again, but unfortunately experienced an early miscarriage. She then started a business. Some reports describe this business as a Chihuahua puppy mill, although specific details were limited. Later that year, Erica was homeschooled through a program created by Casey at their home. Casey was the chief administrator, and the state did not require background checks or detailed progress reports for the school. Records indicate that the program enrolled 3 girls and 1 boy, but there were no annual achievement test scores submitted from 2005 onwards. After this, information about Erica became difficult to find. On July 30th, 2013, Erica's 19-year-old brother, Jamie Parsons, argued with their parents and reported Erica missing. Jamie testified that the last time he saw Erica was on November 19th, 2011. She was standing in a corner, which was a common punishment Erica endured. She didn't look well. She looked like a zombie, he said. She said she didn't feel well. She said she couldn't breathe. Casey Parsons heard this and told her to shut up. When he woke up the next morning, his parents had left early, which was unusual, and Erica was gone. His parents returned home without Erica, and he sensed something was wrong. Jamie felt this explanation was strange, especially since his father, Sandy, appeared very upset when talking about Erica's absence. He recalled his father looking extremely pale and anxious. When he asked his parents where she was, they claimed they had taken her to Asheville, North Carolina, to stay with her biological grandmother, who supposedly reached out on Facebook to reconnect with her. Jamie told the authorities that this was the last he had heard about Erica. An investigation into Erica's disappearance began immediately. Detectives conducted a thorough search of the Parsons' home, lifting floorboards, examining the yard for possible hidden graves, and following every lead available. Despite their hard work, Erica's location remained unknown. They received countless tips and reports, including supposed sightings of her on the roadside and calls from psychics, but none provided any solid answers. The FBI got involved, offering rewards and drawing national attention to the case. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children created an age progression photo to show what Erica might look like at 15 based on her appearance at age 9. These images were widely distributed on billboards in hopes of generating new information. Authorities were committed to finding Erica. Casey and Sandy told investigators that the last time they saw Erica was in December 2011 at a McDonald's in Mooresville, North Carolina. They claimed they took Erica to meet her biological grandmother, Irene Nan Goodman. Additionally, Casey and Sandy were unable to provide any contact information for Erica's grandmother, including the Facebook profile they said she used to communicate with them. The lead investigator put in a lot of effort to find Erica's grandmother and searched for people with her name in Asheville, but he found no evidence of anyone related to Erica. By August 2013, detectives publicly stated their belief that the story about Erica's grandmother was false. They also noted that Sandy and Casey were not cooperating with the investigation. Around the same time, Erica's biological mother, Carolyn Parsons, traveled to North Carolina to help the investigators. On August 21st, Casey and Sandy appeared on the Dr. Phil show, where they argued that Erica was not actually missing, but was a rebellious teenager who simply chose not to communicate with them. During the show, Casey mentioned that Erica's grandmother had told her that Erica refused to come home after staying with her for 2 months. Casey told Dr. Phil that Erica did not bring any of her personal belongings because when she went to stay with the Goodmans, they bought all new clothes for her to wear. When the Goodmans picked her up, a woman nicknamed Strawberry was also there and showed them a pile of clothes with tags in the back of their truck. The house where she was allegedly staying had a horse stable. The Parsons claimed that they also brought their other daughter, Brooke, along to bring Erica to Asheville. Brooke disputed this claim in her own interviews with the police, saying that she never rode a horse to Asheville to bring Erica to live there. Casey also claimed she attempted to contact Erica's grandmother, but the phone number was no longer in service, which she interpreted as Erica blocking their number. Although they appeared on national television, Casey and Sandy claimed they were good parents and insisted that Erica was safe. However, investigators were skeptical due to noticeable inconsistencies in their story. In September 2013, Casey opened her home to the media, showing Erica's old bedroom. But by then, public and official concern about Casey and Sandy's account was growing. The search for Erica continued as worries mounted about her well-being since her last confirmed sighting in 2011. Detectives on Erica Parsons' case had long suspected that Casey and Sandy were withholding important information. They believed that separating the couple might reveal the truth, as Casey seemed to dominate Sandy. However, it proved difficult to keep them apart until investigators discovered a significant error. The Parsons were still collecting adoption assistance and food stamps for Erica, even though she had not lived with them for 2 years. They received monthly checks of $634 in adoption assistance and continued to cash those checks after Erica was no longer living with them. They also continued to claim Erica on their tax returns. These federal benefits, meant for Erica's care, became crucial in involving the FBI. Casey pleaded guilty to 15 charges, while Sandy opted for trial. A jury found Sandy guilty on most charges in October 2014. The jury did not accept Sandy's claim that Casey had been in charge of the fraudulent activities and that he was unaware of their financial situation. At a sentencing hearing in federal court on February 18, 2015, Jamie Parsons and Robin Ashley testified about Erica's abuse by the Parsons family. Federal prosecutor Anand Ramaswamy stated that there was no record of Erica during the time her adoptive parents were receiving illegal money. Declare. The reason is that she is no longer alive. The hearing was continued until March 27th. Prosecutors also presented evidence of a series of scams allegedly perpetuated by Casey Parsons. In 2000, Casey was hired to be a surrogate mother. She became pregnant and took a payment of $10,000 for her services. Weeks later, she called the biological mother, Amy Miller, to say that she had miscarried. Miller says she believed Casey was still pregnant, as Casey refused to turn over medical records, changed her phone number, and sent her nasty emails. Casey then offered to sell the baby to her own sister, Robin, who in turn searched for Miller online to tell her Casey was indeed still pregnant and that Casey had taken money from 2 other couples who wanted to adopt the baby. Miller was able to take custody of her child at birth after getting law enforcement involved. Evidence was also presented of an eBay scam, where Casey accepted money for items listed on eBay but never sent the items. Judge Schroeder called Casey a serial swindler. On March 27, 2015, U.S. District Court Judge Thomas Schroeder sentenced Casey Parsons to 10 years in prison and Sandy to 8 years for fraud. Schroeder believes that Casey was the mastermind behind the events in question and stated that Erica suffered terrible abuse, noting that the fraud distracted investigators from other matters. The judge also mentioned that there was no evidence indicating that Erica was alive. In 2016, there was a significant breakthrough when Sandy, after more than 3 years of deception, confessed that Erica had died 5 years earlier at the age of 13. On September 29th, Sandy led investigators to Erica's remains. They were buried in a small grave near Sandy's mother's home on Blair Hendrick Road, between the towns of Pageland and Mount Croghan, South Carolina. Prior to the discovery, detectives recovered items during a search of a shed on Sandy's property, including a videotape, a hammer, teeth, and school records. There, Sandy quickly indicated the location of a shallow grave where he and Casey had buried Erica. Detectives noted that Sandy was somber and tearful during his confession. Sandy described the events leading up to Erica's death in December 2011. He was awakened by Casey, who informed him that Erica had died. Casey had placed Erica's body in a plastic tote, where it remained for 2 days while they figured out what to do. During this time, they continued with their lives and even attended a Christmas party. Eventually, they took Erica's remains to a site in Chesterfield County to bury her. To try to cover up any evidence, they poured bleach over her body. To avoid being tracked, they removed the batteries from their phones during their trips to the burial site, once to dig the grave and a second time to dispose of Erica's remains. After nearly 5 years of being hidden, Erica's body was finally found. Investigator Chad Moose led the effort to recover her remains, ensuring that she was treated with respect after her tragic life. To honor her, her remains were placed in a body bag that was left unzipped, allowing her to be at peace and no longer in darkness. Moose also added a stuffed animal to the bag while transporting her back to Rowan County. Finding Erica provided closure to a case that had troubled the community, and she was finally buried with the love and dignity she deserved. As one investigator noted, Erica received more love from the community than from her adoptive family. Investigators believed from the beginning that Casey Parsons was primarily responsible for what happened to Erica. They did not reveal the finding of Erica's remains in 2016, hoping that Casey would eventually confess. When faced with questions, Casey firmly denied any participation. She repeatedly claimed, "I've never been there," rejecting all allegations of abuse or misconduct. However, the evidence in the form of Erica's remains revealed a chilling account of ongoing and severe abuse. On October 14, 2016, Erica's remains were sent to the medical examiner, who took 3 months to carefully examine her skeleton. The results were heartbreaking. Erica had suffered severe and ongoing abuse, with injuries all over her body affecting her face, torso, back, and limbs. She had multiple fractures, including broken bones in her shoulder blades and ribs that had partially healed before being broken again. Some of the injuries showed signs of long-term trauma, with new bone growth trying to heal the damage. It was evident that Erica had faced continuous physical violence. Her brother, Jamie Parsons, confirmed the extent of the abuse in interviews. He described how Erica was regularly beaten, often with belts or remote controls, and mentioned friendly reminders, a cruel term used by Casey for bending Erica's fingers back until they almost touched her wrist. Erica experienced more than just physical violence. She was also starved for long periods, severely affecting her growth. By the time she was 13, her bones resembled those of a typical 9-year-old. This combination of abuse and neglect was considered torture, marking an extreme level of cruelty rarely seen in cases of child abuse. Family photos highlighted Erica's suffering as well. While her siblings looked happy and carefree in their pictures, Erica was often shown standing alone, facing a corner. These images powerfully illustrated her isolation and the neglect she faced, making the contrast between her siblings' joy and her own mistreatment deeply tragic. On June 18, 2017, Erica was finally laid to rest in a funeral organized and funded by the Rowan County community. Hundreds of people attended, wanting to show Erica the love and respect she never received during her life. On February 19, 2018, a grand jury indicted both Sandy and Casey Parsons on counts of first-degree murder. felony child abuse, inflicting serious injury, felony concealment of death, and felony obstruction of justice. Casey Parsons was brought to Rowan County for a court appearance on March 14, 2018, while Sandy Parsons was brought back for a court hearing on March 15. Prosecutors announced in April 2018 that they were seeking the death penalty for both Casey and Sandy Parsons. As of February 2019, defense attorneys agreed to separate trials. Casey Parsons pleaded guilty to first-degree murder on August 2, 2019 in Rowan County Superior Court and was sentenced to life without parole. The trial date for Sandy Parsons was set for April 6, 2020, and his attorney requested a change of venue. Sandy Parsons pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, child abuse, concealment of death, and obstruction on December 17, 2019, and was sentenced to at least 33 years to be served after his federal sentence. On January 14, 2022, according to the Federal Bureau of Prisons website, Sandy Parsons was released from federal custody after completing his sentence for tax and mail fraud in connection with benefits received on behalf of Erica. That same day, he began serving a state sentence in Central Prison. Federal Bureau of Prisons records show Casey Parsons was released from federal custody November 25, 2023, to begin serving her state sentence. At that time, her husband was listed as a prisoner at Alexander Correctional Institution. The motivations of the Parsons are still not fully understood, but their actions indicate a profound level of cruelty and neglect. Erica was treated inhumanely, enduring unimaginable suffering from those who were supposed to care for her. As her community honors her memory and strives for justice, there is hope that policies and systems will be improved to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Erica, now at peace, will always be remembered.
Hello everyone. Today, we will learn about another case. The case of Zachary Davis. Zachary Everett Davis was 15 years old when he committed a particularly cold-blooded and senseless murder. Just a couple of years later, he gained notoriety on the internet after a chilling interview with Dr. Phil McGraw. In that interview, he details the murder, what he felt, and what was going on in his mind. The Davis family lived in Hendersonville, Tennessee. The family included Chris, the father, Melanie, the mother, and their two sons, Josh and Zachary, who were just a year apart in age. This close age made them more like best friends than typical brothers, as they spent a lot of time together playing and hanging out. Overall, the Davis family appeared to be happy and normal, except for Zachary, the younger son, who was a challenging child. He was quiet, shy, and emotionally distant, often displaying obsessive behaviors due to his sadness. Then, as Zachary grew a bit older, some strange symptoms began to manifest, and it became clear that he was suffering from a mental illness. This situation was a significant challenge for both Zachary and his family, but they persevered and sought help from various specialists. In 2009, Chris Davis, the father of the family, passed away from motor neurone disease, also known as ALS. This degenerative condition affects muscle control, leading to a gradual loss of movement over time. Individuals with ALS often become unable to walk and may need a wheelchair. The disease also impacts speech, making it slurred and difficult to understand, and in some cases, it can completely rob patients of their ability to speak. Witnessing a loved one endure this painful decline is incredibly challenging, unfortunately. The Davis family underwent this firsthand as they watched Chris decline until his death. This experience deeply affected the entire family, especially Zachary, who was very close to his father. After his father's passing, Zachary's behavior changed significantly. He became withdrawn and fell into depression. His mental health worsened, making daily life a struggle. He was hospitalized multiple times. He was diagnosed with early-onset schizophrenia and depression stemming from his loss. A psychotherapist was assigned to him, and Zachary attended 4 therapy sessions before he stopped going. since he was only 12 at the time. His mother, Melanie, took him to the appointments for reasons unknown. She eventually decided to discontinue the therapy sessions and instead began taking him to a doctor. Whether Zachary resisted therapy or his mother was too busy, he ultimately received no support for his mental health issues despite his challenges. Zachary made an effort to lead a normal life. He attended school, but he rarely interacted with anyone there. While he went to class, his classmates found him odd because he never initiated conversations. For instance, if someone smiled at him, he wouldn't smile back. He would simply look away. He only spoke when absolutely necessary, such as when a teacher addressed him or when an important question was asked. When he did talk, his voice was very soft, almost a whisper. As if he were hesitant to join the conversation, Zachary had no friends. Likely because he did not enjoy socializing or meeting new people, his only close companion was his older brother, Josh. They played and spent a lot of time together before their father's death. After Chris's death, Zachary became withdrawn and seemed to prefer that state. His classmates noticed that he wore the same hoodie every day and often kept the hood up when he was outside, which displayed unusual behavior, unlike his brother. Josh, who was active, participated in sports, had many friends, and frequently attended parties. Zachary chose to isolate himself in his bedroom. He showed little interest in going outside or engaging in a lively, varied life. He did enjoy reading and watching movies, especially horror films, which were his favorite genre. He also had a fascination with true crime documentaries and became overly engrossed in real-life criminal cases. Sometimes idolizing the criminals, this interest was unhealthy. While watching crime films, Zachary exhibited no empathy for the victims and instead became captivated by the killers. Viewing them as role models, he kept multiple notebooks because he loved to write and draw. One of these notebooks was always with him and served as a diary where he recorded his feelings and daily experiences. When Zachary turned 14, he told his mother that he had started hearing voices. Specifically, there was one voice he heard every night that caused him so much stress he could hardly sleep. This voice belonged to his deceased father and said many distressing things. Concerned, Melanie took Zachary to a psychiatrist. Unfortunately, his condition only worsened initially. Zachary only heard the voice at night when he was trying to sleep, but eventually it began to occur all the time, and he found himself constantly talking to it over the next few years. Zachary's mental health continued to decline, and he did not receive adequate support, although he had a diagnosis. He did not attend regular therapy sessions and likely wasn't on any medication after the loss of Chris. Melanie tried to balance work and household responsibilities while spending quality time with her sons. She worked hard to create a sense of normalcy in their lives by organizing family activities and planning fun outings. On August 10, 2012, Melanie took her sons to the movies, and they all had a wonderful time. After the movie, they returned home late and went to bed, however. Zachary had different plans for the night. He packed a backpack with notepads, pens, a toothbrush, a change of clothes, a ski mask, gloves, a hammer, and a knife. He then zipped up the backpack and went to the garage to retrieve a heavy sledgehammer that the family kept there. Around 11 p.m., Zachary picked up the sledgehammer and walked to his mother's bedroom. He paused at the door. Looking at his mother, was asleep, with the lights off. In that moment, he felt completely clear-headed. He approached her, lifted the sledgehammer, and began to strike her repeatedly with all his strength. He did this with such brute force that her blood splashed all over the room. The force of the blows caved in his mother's skull. Zachary recounted that his mother regained consciousness after the first or second blow, but she couldn't speak. Instead, she started to have convulsions during this time. Her eyes were open, and Zachary glanced into her eyes while he struck her with the sledgehammer, even though his mother was looking at him. She was unaware of her surroundings or what was occurring. Zachary admitted that throughout the violent attack on his mother, he was laughing, describing it as joyful laughter. 15-year-old Zachary brutally killed his mother in just a few minutes. However, he had more planned. His older brother, Josh, who was 16 at the time, was asleep in his bedroom after killing their mother. Zachary went downstairs with a bloody sledgehammer, leaving a trail of blood in the hallway before leaving the weapon in the laundry room. There are conflicting reports about what he did next. Some say he took gasoline, while others claim he grabbed whiskey or another flammable liquid. Zachary then returned to his mother's bedroom and began pouring the liquid everywhere. He also soaked the game room upstairs with the flammable liquid. After setting fires in both rooms, he took a pre-packed backpack and left, allowing the house to burn along with his mother's body and his still-living brother. Zachary's plan went horribly wrong. He wanted the house fire to destroy any evidence of his crime and to eliminate his brother. However, he made a critical error by setting the fires in 2 rooms and then closing the doors. This restricted the fire's spread, causing the smoke alarms to activate immediately. The noise of the alarms woke Josh. He jumped out of bed and rushed to his mother's bedroom. When he opened the door, he was met with a horrifying sight: his mother lying on the bed, covered in blood. In that moment, Josh realized he couldn't save her. She was already dead. Frantic, he ran out of the house to a neighbor's home and called 911. It's hard to fathom what must have been racing through Josh's mind. Everything unfolded so quickly. He woke to the fire alarm, discovered the blaze, and rushed to help his mother, only to find her lifeless body. The sequence of events unfolded rapidly, demonstrating how effectively the brain processes such situations. Emergency services arrived at the scene and extinguished the fire. Unfortunately, Melanie Davis was declared dead on sight, and the police began questioning Josh about what had happened. He immediately informed them that his younger brother, Zachary, who was gravely ill, was missing. Zachary had not been in the house during the fire, prompting the police to issue a missing persons report for him. This information was dispatched to all local police officers, and search teams quickly began their efforts. Knowing that Zachary could not have wandered far, he was located the following morning. About 10 miles from home, the police concluded that as soon as he left the house, he just kept walking, stopping occasionally to make entries in his notebook. When found, Zachary was covered in blood and was still wearing the same clothes in which he had killed his mother, although he had a change of clothes in his bag. It's unclear why he didn't use them. This aided the search since the police recognized him immediately. They knew he was the suspect and arrested him, taking him to the police station. There, Zachary Davis confessed to murdering his mother and believed his brother had died in the house fire. He intended to kill both his brother and mother, leaving home under the belief that his plan had completely succeeded. During the police interrogation, Zachary was cooperative, providing all the required information and answering every question. However, he showed no signs of guilt or remorse. He appeared cold and indifferent when recounting his actions. He spoke in a way that suggested he felt no emotions whatsoever. When investigators asked Zachary why he committed the act, he stated that he believed his mother deserved to die because she was not a good mother. He felt she had not properly cared for him and his brothers. Zachary said that she made him and his brother do everything around the house, including washing and cooking. He also said that they essentially had to raise themselves, which likely started around the time their father died. Zachary thought it would be futile to communicate his feelings to her. He believed that bringing up his concerns, expressing himself, or attempting to change her behavior would be pointless because he thought she would not listen. As a result, he believed his only solution was to kill her. However, this was not the only reason for the murder. Zachary also experienced distress because he heard the voice of his deceased father every night, which prevented him from sleeping. This voice communicated dreadful things to him. The voice Zachary heard primarily spoke about his mother, Melanie, claiming she was bad and deserved to die. This is what the voice, which Zachary believed to be his father's, conveyed to him, leading him to think that Melanie should die. When the police asked Zachary how long he had been hearing these voices, he said they had been in his head for a long time. Zachary admitted He hadn't planned it for long. He had the idea and organized everything on the same day. Carrying it out just a few hours later, he may have even decided to do it before they went to the movies, despite claiming that the idea was spontaneous. Zachary's resentment towards his mother had been building up for quite a while. Zachary explained in his interview with Dr. Phil McGraw that he chose the day of the incident because he was free and saw it as a good opportunity to act. During the interview, Dr. Phil asked Zachary what it sounded like when he struck his mother with a hammer. And in a chilling moment, Zachary smiled and described the sound as a wet, dull thud. He laughed several times throughout the conversation. Dr. Phil remarked that such laughter is often a sign of nervousness rather than malicious enjoyment. Regardless, Zachary's laughter came across as unsettling. He claimed to love his mother. Though his sincerity was questionable, he acknowledged that they were not close and rarely communicated. Yet there was no animosity between them. The case shocking not only to the public, but also to those who knew the Davis family. While many were aware that Zachary struggled with mental illness, no one expected him to commit such an act against his mother. Zachary also mentioned that he never truly argued with his mother. Instead, he preferred to withdraw during conflicts. So why did he label her a bad mother if there was no real tension? According to him, their mother simply stopped being a mother to them, however. His relationship with his older brother Josh was even worse than his relationship with his mother. Although very few knew about this from the outside, they seemed like best friends during his teenage years. Zachary claimed that Josh abused him severely, even while their mother was at home. It's important to note that Josh was never charged or convicted of any crime, and Josh firmly denies these allegations. He defended himself during a hearing when Zachary's claims were brought up in court as a reason for Zachary's desire to harm him. In court, Josh reiterated that these incidents never occurred. No evidence supports these claims, but it would be challenging to find proof, even if they were true. Zachary claims that this incident significantly influenced his decision to kill his mother. He felt anger towards Melanie. Believing she should have protected him, he felt let down by her because she was in the house when Josh harmed him, but did nothing to intervene. She didn't even notice. It seemed to Zachary that she didn't care, and he allegedly tried to tell his mother what Josh had done. But she didn't want to hear it. Zachary wrote in his diary that she wouldn't listen to him and that she never believed him. She got angry every time he brought up the subject. She yelled at him, saying he was lying. This was one of the few topics they argued about. As they generally did not have many disagreements or conflicts within the family, Zachary revealed that the violence he experienced deeply affected him. Following the incident, he refrained from bathing for several weeks because the bathroom lacked a lock, and he was afraid his brother might break in while he was vulnerable. This led to him smelling very unpleasantly, which further fueled his anger towards his mother. It is hard to believe that a mother wouldn't notice their child had stopped showering, yet Melanie never mentioned this to Zachary. As a result, Zachary began to harm himself, which was the most severe sign of his illness. He expressed thoughts of wanting to kill his mother with a sledgehammer, wishing for her to die a painful death rather than peacefully in her sleep. He fantasized about starting a fire while Josh was still in the house, so that Josh would wake up in panic as the flames approached him. Wanting him to suffer, however, things didn't unfold as Zachary had envisioned, and Josh survived now. Reflecting on these events, Zachary regrets not having followed through with his plan to ensure his brother was dead before leaving the house. Many believe that Zachary was not mentally fit to stand trial, but he was ultimately deemed competent, and the trial proceeded, although he was only 15 years old at the time of the crime. He was tried as an adult. Zachary's defense team presented several factors that may have influenced his actions. They highlighted the death of his father, the voices he claimed to hear from his father, the violence inflicted by his brother, and the alleged neglect he suffered from their mother, Melanie. These were presented as reasons for Zachary's behavior. However, a few days into the trial, an unexpected development occurred. When called to testify about his mother's murder, Zachary claimed he did not commit the crime. This was surprising, especially since he had previously confessed to the police and discussed the incident for months. He now stated that he had no knowledge of who killed his mother and later accused his brother, Josh, of the murder, saying he tried to cover for him by taking the blame. No one believed this new story. As the evidence clearly pointed to Zachary as the perpetrator, it was evident to everyone that he was responsible for the crime, and it was well known that Josh was not involved in their mother's murder. On Friday, June 5, 2014, when Zachary was 17 years old, Sumner County Judge D. David Gay sentenced Zachary Davis to life in prison, with a minimum term of 60 years in Tennessee and the possibility of parole after 51 years. When he is eligible for parole, Zachary Davis will be about 68 years old. Whether this murder was a brutal murder or the result of a mental disorder, it is a tragic story of a family destroyed. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case, the case of Saga Elneborg. Saga Elneborg was a 20-year-old girl who was 7 months pregnant at the time. She was in a relationship with her boyfriend, Mohammedaman Dirisek Ibrahim, the father of her child. They had been together for about 2 years and were expecting a baby boy. With doctors confirming that the pregnancy was progressing well, Saga was eagerly looking forward to becoming a mother in just a few weeks and had carefully prepared for the birth of her child during this time. She shared pictures of her growing belly and many items she had bought for her future child on social media. She was especially fond of posting pictures of children's clothes. On April 28, 2023, Saga had scheduled a meeting with her boyfriend, Mohammed Amin, to discuss their relationship. That day, she informed her mother that Mohammed Amin was planning to visit her home, so Melissa decided not to interrupt their conversation. Saga's family was very cautious about her relationship with someone from a different culture, especially since they knew that challenges could arise when meeting Mohammed Amin's family from Somalia. At that time, Mohammed Amin was standing outside Saga's apartment door when he entered the house. Saga began to share some of the problems they were having in their relationship. Saga still loved Mohammed Amin and wanted their relationship to succeed. However, she felt uncomfortable when he often hid her from his parents, which caused conflicts between them. On April 29, 2023, at around 1 p.m., Saga's mother, Melissa, came to her daughter's apartment to support her and help gather her belongings in preparation for the arrival of her grandson. When Melissa arrived at the apartment, she was talking on the phone with her other daughter. She rang the doorbell several times, but no one answered, which surprised her. She knocked on the door, used the intercom, and even called Saga's phone and sent a text message. What puzzled she was that there was still no response from Saga. She thought that her daughter might have forgotten about her visit and gone out to run an errand. Although Melissa had a spare key, she noticed that the door was unlocked as she approached, which seemed very suspicious. Saga was always careful to lock the door. Even when she stepped out for a moment to get the mail or do the laundry, there was no way she would leave the door open. When she entered the apartment, Melissa heard the sound of running water in the kitchen, so she rushed in to turn it off. She called out to her daughter, but there was no answer. When Melissa entered her daughter's bedroom, she found the lights off, and the darkness made her feel uneasy. When Melissa turned on the light, she was horrified to see her daughter lying on the floor. Saga was there, with a light cord wrapped around her neck. The scene was even more terrifying because a heavy table had fallen over. Melissa rushed to her daughter's side, pushed the table aside, and carefully removed the cord from her neck. She then called emergency services while attempting to give her daughter first aid. The first thing she noticed was that Saga's body was stiff and very cold, indicating that she had been dead for a considerable amount of time. Paramedics arrived quickly, but unfortunately, both Saga and her unborn child were dead. The police who arrived began an investigation and noted that she had suffered head and facial injuries. The crime scene was covered in dried blood, and jewelry boxes were found upside down on the floor. There were no signs of forced entry, but the police initially considered that she had taken her own life. However, after reviewing data from Saga's cell phone, they concluded that she could not have ended her life by herself. Saga had no mental health problems. She was cheerful and lively. Especially during her pregnancy, she was eagerly awaiting the birth of her child and could never have harmed herself or her baby. Forensic experts collected a significant amount of evidence at the crime scene, including fingerprints, blood, and DNA from under Saga's fingernails and from her belongings for analysis. The forensic expert concluded that Saga died of strangulation, with an estimated time of death between 1 and 3 in the morning. On the forensic expert's desk were not only Saga's body, but also the body of her newborn baby. Weighing 1.7 kg, tests showed that the baby was completely healthy. This was a devastating shock to Saga's mother, family, and friends. The police quickly launched an investigation into the messages from Saga's relatives. The first person they spoke to was her mother, Melissa. She explained that on April 28, her daughter had planned to meet some friends at a local restaurant. Melissa noticed that her daughter seemed very anxious and was checking her phone frequently. Saga said that she did not want to miss a message from her boyfriend, Mohammed Amin. Melissa revealed that he had already informed his parents about Saga. However, before that, Mohammed Amin had been extremely anxious and nearly had a nervous breakdown because he feared that his parents would not approve of his relationship with Saga. His parents are Muslims with strict conservative beliefs. In contrast, Saga is a Swedish citizen with Thai and European heritage, and she holds more modern views. Mohammed Amin and his family are refugees. His parents brought him to Europe when he was a child. Although he grew up in Europe and embraced modernity, he still valued his family's traditions. Another important issue was the difference in religion. Mohammed Amin's family was Muslim, while Saga's relatives were Christian. This difference in beliefs and traditions often led to conflict, straining their relationship. After dining at the restaurant, Saga said goodbye to her mother and friends, who wished her well, not knowing that it would be the last time they would see her alive. Tragically, after returning home, Saga was murdered. Police suspect that Mohammed Amin may have informed his family about his relationship with Saga, which may have provoked their violent reaction and ultimately led to the tragedy. During the initial stages of the investigation, the police looked into whether Mohammed Amin's relatives were involved in the murder. His mother had raised suspicions when she left home late at night. However, it was later confirmed that she had only gone to the shop and returned after about 15 minutes. There was no evidence that his relatives were involved in the case. The police also discovered that one day, Mohammed Amin's mother found the car he was using parked near Saga's house. At that time, his mother suspected he was having a romantic relationship with a Christian woman. After discovering this, Mohammed Amin's mother was furious. She informed him that he was no longer welcome in their home. She felt that if he did not respect their traditions, it would be easier to cut ties with him. In his defense, Mohammed Amin claimed that he had never visited those people and that he had convinced her of that. However, according to Melissa, their relationship had deteriorated since Saga became pregnant. It was rumored that Mohammed Amin wanted her to have an abortion because he was afraid of his family's reaction. Despite this pressure, Saga decided to continue with the pregnancy and give birth. She said that if necessary, she could raise the child herself. In October, Saga shared the news of her pregnancy with her family, and everyone was very happy at that time. Her relationship with her boyfriend was not good, as they often had conflicts due to cultural differences, which made communication difficult. Saga felt that if Mohammed Amin did not change his views, it would be difficult for them to connect. However, A few months later, things seemed to improve. He began to adapt to her lifestyle and accepted the pregnancy. Appearing happy to be a father, Saga then moved into a larger apartment with a nursery, which she began to decorate. By March 2023, they were still together, but there were some troubling signs in their relationship. A friend confided in Saga that Mohammedan had tried to convince her that she needed to kick Saga in the stomach multiple times to induce a miscarriage. Saga was furious when she learned about this, but Mohammed Amin insisted that it was all a fabrication. Melissa knew about these disturbing events, but did not want to accept them as true. However, now that her daughter was dead, it was clear that Mohammed Amin's intention to harm Saga was real. The police began to piece together a timeline of events and soon discovered that Mohammed Amin and Saga had planned to spend that evening together. However, he seemed to be avoiding Saga, intentionally staying late at work to avoid seeing her that evening. Saga spoke to him. She told Mohammed Amin that he needed to tell his family about their relationship, the move, and her pregnancy, or they would break up. On April 28, Saga was waiting to hear from him, according to Melissa. Her daughter seemed quite anxious during this time. The police reviewed cell phone records and confirmed that Saga had been in contact with Mohammed Amin until 11 p.m. on April 28. He had said that he would not inform his parents about Saga and their relationship, stating that his family was more important than having an illegitimate child. Saga felt disappointed with his decision and tried to convince him to reconsider. She argued that if they broke up, his family would eventually find out about the child because she had planned to seek financial support from him after discussing their situation. Mohammed Amin agreed to tell his family about Saga and the baby. He expressed his anxiety, saying that he felt like his heart was going to burst. This was the last message he sent her before she was killed. Police believe that Saga's determination to reveal the truth and her ability to tell his parents herself motivated Mohammed Amin to attack the girl. He remains the only suspect in the case. Mohammed Amin was brought in for questioning. He claimed he had nothing to do with the incident and stated that on the night of the murder, he had returned home to confess to his parents about his relationship with Saga. However, geolocation data showed that this was not true. Mohammed Amin had, in fact, gone to his girlfriend's apartment when told that he was the prime suspect in Saga's murder. Mohammed Amin became defensive. He insisted he was innocent and had an alibi, claiming that he was driving with a friend at the time of Saga's murder. However, the friend was on the phone with someone else and refused to testify, despite his alibi failing. Mohammed Amin maintained that he last saw Saga on the evening of April 27. Mohammed Amin stated that he had confessed their relationship to his parents. However, the police discovered that he had never spent a full night at her new apartment, as he was afraid his family would find out. Due to Mohammed Amin's suspicious behavior, the police decided to arrest him and keep him in custody while they continued their investigation. He was detained for several months. Eventually, the prosecution gathered strong evidence against him, claiming it was sufficient to ensure victory in court. The investigation even involved specially trained dogs, which helped identify some of the evidence. Mohammed Amin's lawyer argued that the dogs' findings should not be the main basis of the case, as they were not a reliable source of information. However, there was still much more evidence against him. DNA analysis and a review of the evidence took quite a while, but eventually confirmed the truth of the case. Mohammed Amin wrapped an electric cord around Saga's neck while she was sleeping on the sofa. He then dragged Saga to the floor and attempted to push her onto her stomach in an effort to force her to terminate the pregnancy. Despite her best efforts to protect her child, Saga sustained injuries to her hip. Mohammed Amin then attempted to strangle Saga, pressing the edge of the table against her throat. Exhausted and unable to lift the heavy object, Saga suffocated. When she died, the table was still pressed against her throat. leaving a deep dent after committing the crime. Mohammed Amin tried to make it look like a robbery by throwing some boxes around. The defense argued that Saga was the victim of real robbers who stole money and various household items. However, the prosecutor believed that Mohammed Amin's actions only added to his guilt. Several missing items were later discovered during a search of his home. He claimed that these items were either his or gifts from his girlfriend. A key piece of evidence against him was his DNA found under Saga's fingernails. In addition, a forensic expert determined that Saga had been abused before her death. Mohammed Amin claimed that the act was consensual and had occurred a few days before her death. However, the prosecution cast doubt on his testimony, highlighting inconsistencies and lies in his statements during interrogation. Police found multiple traces of his DNA in Saga's apartment. The investigation revealed some disturbing searches by Mohammed Amin. Notably, he searched whether kicking a mother in the stomach could harm her unborn child. The prosecutor's office believes that instead of visiting his family, Mohammed Amin went to Saga's apartment. He never intended to tell his family about her for fear of their reaction, but Saga pressured him with her demands. In response, he killed her. Motivated by fear of his parents, the defense argued that the DNA found under Saga's fingernails could have been there long before the murder. However, Melissa, Saga's mother, insisted that her daughter was very clean and had showered shortly before her death. She knew this, especially during Saga's pregnancy. As her daughter was meticulous about her personal hygiene, it is clear that Saga had showered and changed into clean clothes, meaning that the DNA evidence found on her body and belongings was still fresh and must have been left behind during the attack. Curiously, after Saga's death, Mohammed Amin quickly deleted her from Snapchat and removed his social media accounts. The police found that he was trying to hide his connection to the crime. Fortunately, the deleted data was easily recovered and added to the evidence against him. Although there was no direct evidence, Mohammed Amin's behavior clearly showed that he was indifferent to his girlfriend, Saga. During the investigation, it was noted that he was a short distance from her apartment while continuing to communicate with her from afar. He neither approached nor left, as if he were waiting for something. It is possible that during this time, he was trying to muster the courage to attack or wanted to ensure that Saga was asleep. At 2 a.m., Mohammed Amin's cell phone signal went off. He then turned on his phone to try to contact his friend, but his call was ignored. An active call signal from him was detected in the same residential area where Saga lived. This evidence helped the police uncover another lie by Mohammed Amin. He claimed that during this time, he was at home with his parents. However, Mohammed Amin's cell phone only became active at 2:16 a.m., which matched the forensic expert's conclusion about the time of death of Saga and her child. Mohammed Amin's story kept changing. At one point, he fabricated a story about a gang of robbers. He claimed to have hidden a bag of money in Saga's home, but he never explained where he obtained the large sum. According to Mohammed Amin, the robbers broke into Saga's home to steal the cash. Saga tried to stop the robbers, which ultimately led to her murder. The prosecutor's office rejected this idea. As there were no signs of forced entry at the crime scene, it was clear that Saga had either let the killer into her home willingly or that he had a key to her apartment. Mohammed Amin had a motive for the crime. During his 9 months in prison, he never confessed and steadfastly denied any involvement. However, the prosecutor's office gathered a significant amount of evidence, both direct and indirect, to support their case. Although he did not admit to the crime, he expressed fear about telling his family about Saga. He claimed to love her and even the child, but he believed his conservative parents would disown him for dating a European girl. After hearing arguments from both the prosecution and the defense, the jury deliberated on the verdict. On June 9, 2024, They unanimously found Mohammed Amin Abdirisek Ibrahim guilty of the premeditated murder of Saga Elneborg, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Despite this, he maintained that he loved both Saga and his unborn child. Claiming that he never intended to harm them, he insisted that violence was not part of his character and that this was the first crime he had ever committed. The investigation revealed that Mohammed Amin had been seeing other women regularly during the 2 years of his relationship with Saga, although he denied any extramarital affairs. Evidence showed that he had numerous meetings with different girls, some of which became intimate. This information further tarnished his reputation. His defense attorney, meanwhile, argued that Mohammed Amin was innocent and that Saga had been the victim of an attempted robbery. The attorney promised to fight for his freedom and intended to appeal the jury's decision. An appeal was filed shortly after the decision was announced, but the final outcome remains unclear. Although Mohammed Amin was charged with Saga's murder, he was never charged in connection with the death of his unborn child, which angered Saga's family. The investigation attracted considerable public and media attention. The tragedy once again highlighted issues surrounding migrants, especially those from Muslim countries, who have been arriving in Sweden more frequently in recent years. Many people have noted that these migrants struggle to integrate into European society and often refuse to accept individuals from different cultures. A violent murder arising from cultural and religious differences sparked public outrage and prompted calls for government action. Some defended Mohammed Amin, claiming he was innocent. His family argued that he had no violent tendencies, and many believed in his innocence, offering him strong support. According to relatives, Mohammed Amin was not ready to be a father, but he maintained that he loved his girlfriend and son, even after their tragic deaths. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we'll be diving into a new case, the case of Alcácer girls. This story takes us to a small town called Alcácer, located in Valencia, Spain, with a population of only about 7 people. In the 1990s, it became the center of a horrific case involving 3 high school girls. On November 13, 1992, 4 friends, Antonia Rodriguez, Desiree Hernandez, Miriam Garcia, and another girl made plans to meet after school. Their day started like any other. They attended school and looked forward to spending the evening together. When Miriam arrived at school, she expected her father, Fernando Garcia, to pick her up after classes later. Fernando recalled driving her home in his car. During the ride, Miriam talked about her day, the grades she had received, and her dreams for the future. She was especially excited because she was planning to attend a party with her friends that evening. Fernando was sick with the flu, stayed in bed after bringing Miriam home. The party was scheduled to be held at a club called Cooler in the nearby town of Picassent. The girls planned to meet at the remaining friend's house at around 7 p.m. However, the friend wasn't feeling well and decided not to join them. The other 3 girls were determined to go ahead with their plans. By the time they were ready to leave, it was too late to rely on public transportation, so they couldn't find a bus to take them to the club. Miriam decided to call her father for help, but he was asleep instead. Her mother answered the phone. Miriam persistently asked her mother to have her father drive them to the neighboring town, but her mother refused. She believed it was a bad idea and potentially unsafe, and she also wanted her husband to rest. Miriam's mother insisted that the girls return home because it was already late. Miriam, however, asked if she could stay overnight at a friend's house, suspecting this was just an excuse. Her mother firmly insisted that Miriam come home. Reluctantly, Miriam agreed and promised to be back by curfew. Despite this, the girls were determined not to give up on their plans. They decided to find their own way to the club. At 8 p.m., the 3 friends began walking toward the club. For these young teenagers, this felt like an important night. It was their first time attending such a party. They had all promised their parents they would return on time. As the night went on, keeping that promise turned out to be much harder than they expected. Miriam was about 30 minutes late returning home, and her mother grew increasingly worried. Panic set in. However, in the early 1990s, the girls did not have cell phones, making contact with them impossible. The uncertainty was overwhelming for the parents. Miriam's mother tried to reassure herself, thinking that perhaps Miriam had been upset, gone to a friend's house, or was avoiding coming home to prevent an argument. Though this explanation felt overly optimistic, it gave her a brief sense of calm. She began calling the parents of all the friends Miriam had planned to meet that day. To her dismay, none of the girls were at home. The other parents were just as alarmed and immediately began searching for clues about where the girls might be. No one had any idea when or where the teenagers had disappeared. The last time Miriam's mother had spoken to her, Miriam was leaving a friend's house. It seemed unlikely that the girls could have gone far, as they had no money and had left all their belongings at home. The parents speculated that the girls might have gotten lost while trying to find transportation. Fernando decided to go to Picasso to look for his daughter, though deeply worried. Miriam's father tried to reassure himself, believing that his daughter had always been a quiet, responsible girl who avoided trouble and bad influences. He hoped to find her near the club and bring her and her friends back home. Unfortunately, when he arrived, there was no sign of the missing girls. Witnesses at the club could not recall seeing anyone matching their descriptions. Fernando relayed this information to her mother, and the family quickly decided to contact the police. However, the police showed little urgency. They assumed the girls had simply stayed out late at the party, wandered into another club, had too much to drink, or spent the night with friends, and would likely return home soon. The authorities informed that they had to wait at least 24 hours before officially filing a missing persons report. The officers suggested that the teenagers might have a habit of sneaking out, but the parents firmly denied this. All the missing girls were between 14 and 15 years old. Miriam had left all her belongings in her room, clearly intending to return later that night. As she had promised her mother, similar patterns were observed in the other girls' cases. One of them had hastily packed a sports bag with items needed for practice the next day and had assured her parents she would come back early to rest. This behavior was entirely out of character for the girls, which left their families deeply concerned. Despite this, law enforcement remained resolute in their belief that no foul play was involved. Crime rates in the area were very low, making it difficult for anyone to believe the disappearances could be connected to criminal activity. When news of the case became public, everything changed. People in the small town, where most residents knew each other, were deeply shocked and assist in the search. Despite 24 hours passing without any progress from the police, the girls' whereabouts remained unknown. Volunteers formed groups to look for the girls and distributed leaflets with their descriptions. Throughout the town, Miriam's family was especially proactive. Working closely with the police and witnesses, the last person who saw the girls was their friend, who had fallen ill and stayed home instead of going to the party. She explained that the group had no access to transportation, no one to give them a ride, and no money. They had planned to hitchhike if necessary, an idea she strongly opposed. Considering it too dangerous, she tried to dissuade her friends, but feared they might go through with it anyway. Investigators questioned other young people who attended the party, but none of them remembered seeing the missing girls that night. This prompted the police to focus on the shortest route the girls would have taken to reach the party. A classmate of one of the girls stated that on Friday evening, as he was heading home after his final exams, he saw the girls in the city center. They were walking in the opposite direction of the club. When he asked if they were going to the party, they said no. He couldn't remember the exact time, but guessed they were likely heading to their friend's house. Another witness, an older acquaintance, reported seeing the girls a few blocks from their friend's house. He was driving through the area with his girlfriend when he noticed them. Although he didn't know the girls well, he offered them a ride. Antonia, Miriam, and Desiree told him they were heading to the nightclub Cooler. Then his car broke down, so he dropped the girls off near an auto repair shop near the nightclub. From there, they likely continued on foot. The area where they were dropped off was near some fields. There were a few buildings around, so the area wasn't entirely deserted. Someone might have seen the girls, and there was hope of identifying another key witness. Shortly after, a witness came forward. A woman testified that she saw girls matching the description walking past her house. She mentioned noticing a white car with 3 or 4 men inside that stopped near the group. After briefly speaking with the driver, the girls got into the car. However, she couldn't remember the car's make or license plate. Her testimony raised several questions, considering the number of people already in the car. It wasn't clear how the girls could fit into a typical white sedan if there were already 4 occupants. The search effort reached a standstill, and it appeared the police's interest in the case was waning. Just a few days after the rescue operation started, the girls' parents began to fear the case would be abandoned entirely. Faced with this situation, Miriam's parents intensified their efforts to gather community support. They handed out flyers and spread the word through radio, television, and newspapers. By this time, Fernando had put in significantly more effort than law enforcement, however. His dedication sparked mixed reactions. Some accused him of seeking attention or fame amidst the turmoil of his daughter's disappearance. Despite this, he successfully brought national attention to the case and pressured the police to take more decisive action. A month and a half had passed since the girls disappeared, and for the 3 families from Alcácer, New Year's Eve was approaching, a holiday they would have to endure without their daughters. There had been no updates about the girls, and it seemed as though the police had completely stopped the investigation. The parents were trapped in an unimaginable state of anguish and uncertainty. On January 27, about 40 kilometers from where the girls lived, 2 beekeepers went to check on their hives in a remote, rugged area near La Romana. The location was difficult to reach unless someone was already familiar with it. While there, they noticed something unusual, a faint glimmer of light coming from the underbrush. As they approached, they found a patch of disturbed soil with something protruding from it. Upon closer inspection, they realized it was a hand emerging from the loose earth. The hand wore a wristwatch, which had reflected the sunlight and caught their attention. The police were immediately notified of the discovery. Later that day, during an excavation at the site, the bodies of the missing schoolgirls were discovered. All 3 were buried together in a shallow grave, bound with ropes, wrapped in a carpet, and covered with dirt. Shortly afterward, an investigation team was assembled, but its members were inexperienced and unfamiliar with handling such cases. This lack of expertise led to several critical mistakes. The burial site was neither photographed nor properly examined, and it wasn't secured until hours after the police arrived. As a result, crucial evidence may have been trampled, overlooked, or entirely lost. Afterward, authorities concentrated their search on the area surrounding the grave. Among the findings were personal belongings of the beekeepers and several small, isolated cabins. In one of these cabins, a piece of jewelry resembling an earring worn by one of the girls was discovered. Since the bodies were found on the beekeepers' property, their homes were searched thoroughly. Police suspected that these locations might contain items related to the victims. However, initial searches did not turn up anything. The medical examiner identified numerous signs of torture on the bodies of all 3 victims. The girls had suffered horrific deaths. 2 of them, Antonia and Desiree, were found decapitated, while Miriam's body was missing her right hand, which was never recovered, although bullet wounds were determined to be the cause of death. The bodies also showed multiple stab wounds and evidence of severe beatings. Some of the victims had teeth knocked out. It was clear they had been held captive for an extended period. Bound, subjected to starvation and dehydration, each girl endured brutal abuse and torture over several days, with some abuse continuing even after death. At the burial site, numerous DNA traces were discovered on the carpet, but the forensic technology of the early 1990s was too limited to fully analyze the evidence in and around the grave. Investigators found various unrelated items, fragments of clothing, rope, hairs, bone fragments, scraps of paper, and other debris at the time of the discovery. Fernando was in London, working to raise international awareness about the girl's disappearance. He had planned a press conference the following day to continue the search for the missing schoolgirls. Despite everything, he remained hopeful that the girls might still be found alive. The news of their bodies being discovered was devastating. He immediately boarded the first flight home to be with his family during this tragic time. The extensive media coverage of these events had unintended and troubling consequences for those directly involved when the police informed the families about the girls' deaths. The moment was broadcast live on television. What should have been a private, painful moment was turned into a public spectacle, resembling reality TV. While search efforts were still ongoing, the police quickly identified potential suspects at the burial site. They found fragments of paper that turned out to be part of a patient record from a nearby hospital. This clue led them to a small house near the location where the girls' bodies were discovered. Inside the house, they found an earring, which became a key piece of evidence in the investigation. The suspect was Antonio, who had access to the house and a prior criminal record. However, the authorities could not apprehend Antonio, as he had disappeared, seemingly fleeing, which added to suspicions about his involvement. Forensic analysis determined that more than one person had attacked the girls. Investigators then turned their attention to Antonio's social circle, including his friend Miguel Ricard. Miguel was initially shocked to be under suspicion. Investigators noted that Miguel owned a white Opel Corsa car, and as mentioned earlier, a witness had stated she saw a white car stop next to the girls on the night of their disappearance. During his initial interrogation, Miguel stated that he hadn't seen Antonio in a long time, although they had been friends for years. Miguel said he didn't know Antonio's current whereabouts. He acknowledged that Antonio had psychological issues that could make him dangerous. Investigators suspected that Miguel's statements were an attempt to deflecting attention. Authorities accused Miguel of lying about his location during the girl's disappearance, suspecting he was trying to create a false alibi by claiming he was in prison at the time. Further investigation revealed that Miguel had only been jailed a few weeks after the murders. It remains unclear whether Miguel was genuinely mistaken or deliberately lying. Miguel grew up in a difficult household. His mother died when he was 3 years old, and he was raised by an abusive father. This upbringing led him to experiment with alcohol and banned substance. At 16, Miguel dropped out of school to support himself and began working. He spent some time working on a farm and later, at the age of 20, became a used car salesman. He lived with a girlfriend for several years, and when she became pregnant with their daughter, Miguel joined the Spanish army. After leaving the army, he returned home. At this time, he exhibited domestic violence, which put a strain on his relationship with his girlfriend. They eventually separated, and Miguel moved in with his close friend Antonio. Miguel and Antonio began committing crimes such as theft and stealing cars, which attracted police attention. Although Miguel had no history of violent behavior, Antonio's troubled past raised suspicions. Antonio was born in 1966 in Brazil to a large family that later moved to Spain from a young age. He exhibited a volatile and aggressive temperament, often causing trouble in school and instigating fights. His behavior worsened during his teenage years, as he frequently skipped school and was rumored to carry a weapon. Eventually, Antonio became involved in criminal activities, forming a gang that targeted vulnerable men. The gang would lure their victims to isolated locations under false pretenses, rob them, and blackmail them for extended periods. During this time, Antonio developed addictions to alcohol and banned substance, eventually he becoming involved in banned substance distribution. His sadistic and abusive behavior also extended to his own family, leading them to report him to the police. His mother even obtained a restraining order to protect herself from his aggression. Antonio was eventually convicted of crimes related to banned substance dealing and violence against, receiving a 9-year prison sentence at the time of the murders of 3 schoolgirls. Antonio was on weekend leave from prison due to good behavior after the murders. Antonio fled during multiple interrogations. Detectives obtained a confession from Miguel, seemingly solving the case. However, Miguel later repeatedly denied the confession, claiming it had been made under pressure and coercion. The guilt of both Antonio and Miguel still needed to be definitively proven. This disagreement caused tensions even among the victims' families. Meanwhile, the case unfolded under intense media scrutiny, gradually becoming a pivotal moment in Spain's legal history from the beginning. Police actions raised serious questions and sparked controversy. Miguel's confession lacked consistency, with his testimony changing each time. Additionally, the detectives' records appeared fragmented, leading many of Miguel's supporters to believe that investigators had manipulated him to obtain the answers they wanted. According to the official prosecution narrative, Miguel and Antonio met on the specified date late that evening. They were driving a white car down a road when they encountered 3 schoolgirls walking toward a club. After stopping near the girls, the latter appeared to feel uneasy. Miguel confessed that Antonio instructed him to help seize the girls and forcefully drag them into the car. The two then drove to a secluded area where they assaulted and abused the victims. They decided to move to a more remote mountainous location near an apiary. There, in an isolated cabin, they continued to torture and abuse the girls for days. Miguel stated in his confession that he tried to persuade Antonio to stop, but claimed Antonio ignored him and coerced him into participating. Miguel asserted that he complied out of fear for his own life. The girls reportedly cried and begged for release, but Antonio struck one of them on the head with a rock to silence her. After a prolonged period of torture, the perpetrators murdered the girls. They wrapped the bodies in a carpet and buried them on the apiary grounds. Miguel later retracted his confessions after consulting a lawyer. When Fernando looked into these allegations, he discovered that many interrogations had been inadequately documented. Additionally, there were no audio or video recordings of Miguel's confessions, leaving investigators to rely solely on written reports. This raised suspicions that something was being hidden throughout the case. Miguel faced significant challenges, including going through 7 different defense attorneys, which caused major delays as the investigation and his detention lasted 4 years. Shortly before the trial, a new lawyer joined the case and had to review over 800 documents, including confessions and expert reports. During this time, advancements in forensic science enabled more detailed DNA analysis. Investigators had collected numerous samples of bodily fluids, hair, and blood during the investigation. However, they could not be fully analyzed with the forensic techniques available in the early 1990s. Now, updated methods made such investigation possible. Just 1 day before the trial, Fernando requested a delay to conduct additional analysis of this evidence. He contacted an independent forensic expert with experience in criminal cases. He quit his job and devoted his life entirely to the investigation, which took a heavy toll on his personal life. His marriage suffered greatly, and his wife later admitted that the tragedy had reduced their relationship to a mere shadow of what it once was. The tragedy also severely impacted Fernando's wife, whose health declined over the years. She battled cancer and ultimately refused a liver transplant, saying it should go to someone who truly wanted to live. By the time the trial began, she had passed away. The case of Alcácer girls undoubtedly became the most high-profile case in Spain's history. A heated confrontation unfolded as the prosecution's version of events was riddled with gaps and inconsistencies. Independent experts were unable to find any evidence linking Antonio or Miguel to the murders of the 3 schoolgirls. Their only connection to the case appeared to be a cabin near the area where the bodies were discovered and a torn map located close to the burial site, but outside the pit. Searches of the apiary cabin and the white car, allegedly used by the men, revealed no traces of the girl's torture or blood. Considering Miguel's confession, it seemed highly improbable that no physical evidence of the crimes could be found in the house or vehicle. Despite such doubts, the prosecution remained determined to secure a conviction. Meanwhile, Fernando launched his own investigation and unearthed evidence suggesting the involvement of high-ranking officials. Driven by the painful loss of his daughter, he tirelessly sought the truth, openly criticizing the entire investigative process and sparking widespread public debate. He even appeared on television, alleging that the crime might be linked to a criminal network responsible for orchestrating such activities. He accused several prominent figures in Spain, a move that drew significant public attention. However, these allegations came with consequences. Both Fernando and a criminologist assisting him faced legal repercussions for attempting to obstruct the ongoing investigation. Miguel's trial began in mid-1997. By that time, he had already spent 4 years behind bars. He was expected to receive a severe sentence for the crimes he was accused of, despite the lack of concrete evidence. Miguel was convicted of kidnapping, abuse, and murdering the 3 victims and sentenced to 170 years in prison. In 2010, Miguel appealed to the European Court, which ruled in his favor, stating that the sentence constituted cruel punishment. The European Commission argued that indefinite prison terms could make inmates increasingly uncontrollable and violent toward other prisoners and staff. Miguel was later released in 2013, following a ruling by the Court of Justice of the European Union. As for Antonio, his whereabouts remain unknown. It was suspected that he had attempted to flee the country, although briefly detained in Ireland for traveling without a ticket. He disappeared shortly afterward. Some speculated that he allegedly jumped into the sea off the coast of Ireland to end life. Many believe he successfully escaped abroad, possibly returning to his native Brazil, as he held dual citizenship to this day. Antonio remains on fugitive lists as a prime suspect in the crimes committed against the 3 schoolgirls. The case's resolution and law enforcement's actions remain deeply controversial. Fernando continues to insist that the truth is far more complex than the prosecution has claimed. Samples taken from the carpet and the girl's hair couldn't be matched to any existing profiles in the database. The father believes that Antonio and Miguel likely didn't act alone. More people were likely involved in the crime. However, this truth may now never be revealed. Antonio, who could have helped uncover what really happened, was never found. A statue of the 3 girls was erected in the nearest cemetery where their bodies were buried. Just as in life, the girls remained together even after death. Hello again, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Michael Weiss. Jake Nolan was born in New York, USA, as the youngest child in his family, with an older brother and an older sister. The family lived on Long Island and was relatively wealthy. Jake was known for being kind and respectful to everyone. However, at the age of 5, he was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. This condition affected him throughout his life, becoming more evident at the age of 15 when he began to experience mood swings. Despite facing many challenges, Jake had some positive moments in high school, including being recognized for winning a competition. However, this was also when he was diagnosed with anxiety and depression at the age of 17. Jake was hospitalized after a disturbing incident involving his parents after an argument. He threatened to commit end life with a kitchen knife. During this time, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, a serious condition. His parents tried to help him manage his health problems and regularly consulted specialists, but their efforts were not very successful. Jake was prescribed about 30 different medications. This alone led to serious side effects, often leaving him feeling worse than before. Many of the medications interacted negatively with each other, resulting in poor treatment outcomes during this time. Jake also began drinking and using drugs. When Jake started college, his parents hoped he would improve. At first, everything seemed fine, but then they received a worried call from the school. The dean wanted to know why Jake had been absent for the past 2 weeks. That's when his parents discovered that he had been in bed most of the time. His depression worsened, and he began using illegal drugs regularly. This alarmed his family, who wanted to help him. But even at 19, Jake showed no interest in studying or working. Instead, he spent all his time having fun and avoiding responsibility. One day, Jake's mother spoke to her niece, Pamela Buckbinder, a successful psychiatrist in New York by her 40s. Pamela had won numerous awards and occasionally published articles in popular magazines. Concerned about Jake, Pamela offered to take him into her home for a while and set up a makeshift rehab facility there. She promised to organize therapy sessions for Jake and monitor his medication instead of charging him for her help. Pamela asked Jake to assist her in caring for her 4-year-old son during the summer due to their family ties. They agreed to her plan. Pamela and Jake are cousins, and she saw this as an opportunity to strengthen their family bond while helping to care for her son. When Jake's mother shared this with him, he viewed it as a break from his family and agreed to stay with Pamela for a few months, during which he would help care for her son. Pamela's husband is another prominent psychiatrist, Michael Weiss. Pamela and Michael had a rocky relationship. They often argued and got into physical fights. In one incident, Pamela was arrested for throwing a glass at Michael, causing a head injury that required stitches. Pamela argued that they were both equally at fault, as Michael was also arrested after another altercation and was accused of threatening her. Pamela and Michael ended their relationship in 2009, after which Pamela moved to Greenwich Village in Manhattan in 2011. They began a custody battle during this time. Pamela often spoke ill of Michael to their son, portraying him as a bad father. She also spread false and damaging stories about him to others, apparently trying to turn the child and others against him. This behavior was primarily intended to gain an advantage in the custody dispute and secure a substantial child support payment. By 2012, the couple finally reached an agreement that allowed Michael to spend weekends with their children. However, an unusual condition imposed by Pamela was that Michael purchase a life insurance policy on himself, naming their son Calder as the beneficiary, with Pamela as the trustee. Eventually, Michael, exhausted from the legal battle, reluctantly agreed to this questionable request. The custody battle reached its final stages after Jake moved into Pamela's home. Jake began sharing his thoughts and struggles with Pamela, who gave him advice, monitored his medications, and made his life much easier. Jake became the godfather to Pamela's son Calder, and often said that the experience gave his life meaning. On November 12, 2012, Michael spent the day with his son, Calder, for the first time. He felt excited because he had reached an agreement with Pamela about custody, allowing him to interact with Calder without stress. Michael's schedule that morning was to take Calder to kindergarten and then go to work. In the afternoon, Calder would return home to his mother, while Michael was attending a therapy session with a patient. Jake appeared at the door with a worried look on his face and carrying a large bag. Michael realized that Jake knew he had moved in with Pamela and was dealing with some mental health issues. However, Michael was unsure about the current situation because he was with a patient. He asked Jake to wait outside until he finished. When the therapy session ended, Michael found Jake still waiting in the hallway. Dr. Michael asked him about the large bag. Jake claimed that it contained important documents for Calder's kindergarten that he had helped Pamela prepare. However, Michael was skeptical about this explanation. Michael asked Jake to leave the bag outside because he was worried that Jake might plant a listening device there. However, Jake insisted he couldn't leave the bag behind as it could be stolen. Eventually, Michael relented and allowed Jake to bring the bag inside with him upon entering the office. Jake asked to use the restroom first. Later, he attacked Michael with a sledgehammer. Fortunately, Michael avoided a fatal blow to the head, but Jake struck him in the shoulder. Jake then lost his balance because the sledgehammer was too heavy, dropped it, and pulled out a knife to attack Michael. Michael fought back, pushed Jake away, tried to run into the hallway, and called for help. People gathered in the hallway, and shortly after, Michael passed out from blood loss. Witnesses called the police and paramedics. Jake, however, didn't attempt to flee. Instead, he sat in the hallway and took pictures. When the paramedics arrived, they found Michael unconscious and Jake sitting beside him. Jake told the paramedics that Michael had attacked him first. Meanwhile, both Michael and Jake were taken to the hospital, where they were placed under police supervision. Forensic experts retrieved the sledgehammer and knife from Michael's office. Upon examination, they found a DNA sample on the handle of the sledgehammer that matched Jake's. The knife was also analyzed and determined to have come from Pamela's kitchen, inside a large bag belonging to Jake. The police found a pack of cigarettes, zip ties, and a hand-drawn map of the building where Michael worked, showing multiple entrances and exits. The police traced the bag to a purchase near Pamela's home. They reviewed surveillance footage from a nearby hardware store and observed that Jake had bought the sledgehammer used in the attack, along with zip ties and a bag. The night before, Pamela was seen next to him, paying cash for the items, possibly aware of the planned crime. Although Michael suffered multiple injuries, none were life-threatening. Jake was taken to the hospital but was released on $200 bail while awaiting a hearing on the attempted murder charge. He is allowed to stay with his parents in Miami. Jake spoke to the police and claimed that the attack was self-defense, stating that Michael had taken Jake's sledgehammer and tried to injure himself. When Jake realized that his lie was not convincing, he decided to tell the police the truth about what had happened. He accused Pamela of being the real mastermind, claiming that she had manipulated him and turned him against Michael. Pamela then provided the police with Jake's medical history, which indicated that he had suffered from a number of serious mental health issues. The police investigated Jake's testimony, and evidence supporting his claim quickly emerged. Pamela had an ulterior motive to harm her ex-husband. In November 2013, Michael Weiss filed a lawsuit against Pamela, alleging that his ex-wife pressured him into taking out $1 million life insurance policy. He pointed out that the attack occurred just 4 days after the contract was issued, which raised suspicions. Michael believed that this was a planned plot to benefit Pamela financially. Additionally, Jake's attorney secured a restraining order against Pamela, arguing that it was necessary to protect Jake's mental health from her influence. Despite the overwhelming evidence against Pamela, she was not arrested or questioned, and her medical license remained intact. Meanwhile, the investigation continued, and an expert was brought in to analyze the building blueprints found in Jake's bag. It was revealed that Pamela had drawn the blueprints, but she claimed that the maps were for Jake to find Michael and pick up Calder if necessary. Pamela was in regular contact with Jake before and after the attempted assassination. Their text messages showed that she was aware of his whereabouts and what was going on. After Jake sent a selfie to Michael following the attempted assassination, they had a long conversation that revealed the plan had failed. Jake expressed guilt for not being able to kill Michael during this time. Jake fully admitted his actions and showed a willingness to accept the consequences, no matter how severe they might be. He told detectives that Pamela had convinced him to kill Michael to free her from an abusive relationship that was harming both her and her young son at the time. Jake was so close to the boy that he wanted to help his relatives get rid of Michael. He did not know that Michael's life was insured for a significant amount of money and that Pamela could benefit from the insurance payout. Jake did not care about the money because his family supported him. However, Pamela manipulated him to the point that he was willing to do anything for her. Unfortunately, the case did not progress. Even after 2 years, the situation remained unchanged. As of 2015, Pamela was still living comfortably at home with her son, sharing custody with Michael, as there was no evidence to prove her involvement in the attempted murder. Meanwhile, Jake is in Miami, receiving comprehensive care, and his condition begins to improve as he starts to regain his sanity. Jake realizes that he has become a pawn in Pamela's scheme. Devoted to caring for her child and managing household responsibilities, he understands that Pamela never intended to help him. Instead, she aimed to use him for her own dubious purposes. Jake has overcome his harmful habits and envisions a future where he can start a family and raise children. However, he faces the serious possibility of being imprisoned for years due to the betrayal of someone he once trusted. Additionally, questions begin to arise regarding the nature of Jake's relationship with Pamela, which seems to extend beyond simple family support and therapeutic assistance. Their interactions resemble typical affectionate exchanges between newlyweds, and a photo of them together in bed has surfaced. It appears that Pamela is pursuing Jake with the intent of deepening their relationship. Possibly to manipulate him, Pamela recounted a fabricated story of having endured physical violence throughout her marriage. She eventually accused Michael of trying to gain custody of their son. Over time, Jake grew to believe her, insisting that he would do anything for Pamela. She convinced him that in order to survive, he needed to eliminate Michael. It was clear that Pamela was not strong enough to confront a robust adult man, making Jake a suitable candidate for her dangerous scheme. The trial began in March 2016, where the jury was presented with a detailed account of the events that took place on November 12, 2012. Jake recalled Pamela waking him up that morning, insisting that it was time to put their plan into action. She showered him with compliments, calling him her savior. After breakfast, she continued her manipulations. On November 11, they purchased a sledgehammer, zip ties, and a bag in preparation for their plan. The details of the plot were far more sinister than the events that transpired in Michael's office. Initially, Jake was supposed to attack Michael and torture him before he died. Pamela wanted Michael to suffer for as long as possible. Jake then went to Michael's office, entering through the service entrance, where security cameras recorded his arrival. Remarkably, he made no attempt to conceal his identity. With confidence, he walked down the hallway and approached Michael's office. At the time, Michael was examining a patient, forcing Jake to step back and wait outside. Jake was in the hallway, rethinking his actions. He soon realized that if he backed out now, he wouldn't be able to face Pamela. There was no turning back. So he carried out the attack while awaiting trial. Jake undergoes evaluations from several psychiatrists, who noted that he was fully aware of his actions. Concluding that his decision to kill Michael was intentional, the jury deliberated and found Jake Nolan guilty of attempted murder. He was sentenced to 9.5 years in prison, while Pamela remained free on bail. This changed on October 19, 2017, when the police attempted to arrest Pamela and urged her to turn herself in, but she ignored their requests. When the search began, she could not be found at any known address and did not answer her cell phone or work phone. An anonymous source eventually informed the police of Pamela's whereabouts, and she was arrested at a friend's home. Pamela was charged with second-degree intentional homicide and first-degree assault. On September 7, 2022, Pamela Buchbinder admitted guilty to these charges to avoid a 25-year sentence. However, on October 11 of that year, she attempted to withdraw her guilty plea, Claiming that she had been under the influence of illegal drugs and had been assaulted by security guards, her request to withdraw her guilty plea was denied. Ultimately, Pamela was sentenced to 11 years in prison, and her medical license was officially revoked. Jake felt deep remorse for his actions. His parents firmly believed in his innocence and were convinced that Pamela was responsible for his condition. Jake's parents stated that sending Jake to Pamela's home for treatment was the worst decision they ever made. Pamela, however, continued to maintain her innocence. The child's father, Michael, was granted custody.